Chapter 2800. Immediately after, a ball of sword aura rose above his head and broke through the clouds in an instant. It instantly broke through the Tianqi dynasty's prince's attack. What did he see now? The formation that Emperor Qin set up back then was completely opened, and these young men and women were actually fighting within it. Now that the allied forces of the various races were united, it was impossible for them to fight separately. There were even many powerful divine king-level existences that were buried here. Back then, the monster and demon realms joined forces to invade the heaven realm. At that time, almost all the top experts of the monster and demon realms were gathered. It wasn't strange for all kinds of experts to appear here. However, this was a benefit for Yi Shiwen. He still didn't know what the situation was on the other side of the seal. Now, he could capture these princes of the Sky Clan and ask them clearly. But now, these powerful beasts that once caused the death of a peak divine king were being besieged and beaten back. They weren't a match for them at all. These young men were simply ridiculously powerful. All of them were actually king-level existences. The glory of the Sky Clan? Ha ha ha, I only know that a bunch of idiots have been exiled twice. Yi Shiwen sneered. It should be said that the Tianqi dynasty itself was a branch of the Tianqi dynasty. Yi Shiwen had fought with the Tianqi emperor before, so he was very clear about the martial arts that came from the same source. There was naturally no need to mention the preciousness of the supreme-grade artifact. Even if it was a divine king, not everyone could gather the materials needed to refine a supreme-grade artifact. The martial arts of the Tianqi dynasty. Looks like you should be a prince of the Tianqi dynasty, Yi Shiwen said calmly. In other words, these 99 supreme-quality god artifacts would require at least 100 god kings to gather. Just which clan was it that was so bold? Human, are you deaf? Didn't you hear me? There's a big shot among us who wants to take you as a slave. This is what you've cultivated for thousands of years. The leading young man said angrily. Nope. A human like you also knows about my Apocalypse dynasty's reputation. Since that's the case, why don't you just surrender? He roared, and his hand slammed down without stopping. Different from the remnants of the Tian clan, the Tian clan who had just been released from the seal clearly did not have such an understanding. In the teachings left behind by their ancestors, they were the only masters of the world, great figures who were born to live in the world. Ordinary experts of the heavenly race probably didn't know much about the plans of the heavenly race, but these princes were different. They were equivalent to the existence of Ji Renwang. So, it was enough for Yi Shiwen to ask a lot of things. Human God King, why are you still not kneeling down? Otherwise, we will spare your life. When these young men and women saw that Yi Shiwen was just an ordinary divine king, they didn't take him seriously at all. They thought that he was just an ordinary human divine king. The killing intent between this young man's eyebrows was jumping. He was completely infuriated by Yi Shiwen. He directly slammed his huge palm down towards Yi Shiwen. There was a ball of black light on his palm. He actually integrated the nomological laws he cultivated into it. What a joke. What is the Apocalypse dynasty? Even the Apocalypse Great Emperor is gone. What can you people do? Yi Shiwen said with a laugh. This time, Yi Shiwen immediately understood that they should be here for the thing left behind by the Qin Emperor. Otherwise, with the strength of this group of divine kings, they shouldn't have specially come here. It wasn't worth it at all. Which force came out? There were actually so many divine kings gathered here. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized it. It was the aura of the Tian clan. Moreover, if it was a force from the myriad heavens, it was impossible for Yi Shiwen not to have heard of it. It was simply super extravagant. Many divine kings didn't even have a supreme-grade divine artifact. Even Yi Shiwen didn't have such extravagance. If these powerful dead things were to break free from the suppression of the formation, it would be a great disaster once something happened. It was also because of this that the 4 great human kings of the desolate antiquity came here one after another to suppress it. It was really too dangerous. Whether it was noble or not depended on one's strength and not bragging. They understood this very well. Soon, Yi Shiwen entered the center of the formation. He only saw a group of young men and women actually trying to break open the divine tomb. Courting death. Generally speaking, the remaining Tian clan experts in the myriad heavens wouldn't dare to call themselves dynasties. At most, they would call themselves dynasties because they were just ordinary divine kings. Back then, Yi Shiwen had only approached the periphery, and he almost fell for it. In their understanding, this simply didn't exist. In their opinion, the fact that they were willing to accept them as slaves was already a great deal. No one was a match for the Tian clan one-on-one, not to mention that they had so many people. But this human in front of them was only one person, and he even entered their formation. Since he had already entered, it was simply impossible for him to escape. At least in their education, this was indeed the case. And in the depths of the divine tomb, loud roars came. His divine king was too arrogant, but he felt that he was ignored by an ant, and he was extremely unhappy. In this divine tomb, many roars that didn't seem to be alive came from it. Yi Shiwen saw powerful evil spirits wandering around, and there were corpses that belonged to divine kings coming back to life. It seems that our Tian clan hasn't come to this world for many years, so you lowly creatures have completely forgotten our glory. That young man saw Yi Shiwen sneer and couldn't help but find it a little funny, as if he had seen the funniest thing in the world. Back then, Yi Shiwen had also received the energy of Emperor Qin, so his cultivation had also improved greatly. Have you lost your mind? I don't think so. Yi Shiwen sneered. Just in time. I was originally worried about how to find out the details of the Tian clan. Just in time, a group of princes has been sent here. You'd better tell me everything you know, otherwise I will make you beg for death. These princes of the Tian clan dynasty had come in person, so it must not be a good thing. However, it was not difficult to see from these people that the seal was almost forced to win. It could actually accommodate so many divine kings coming in and out. This storm would blow even more violently, even far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Who are you? Yi Shiwen didn't rush to make a move, but looked at them and asked. In the divine tomb, there were many divinities that hadn't been extinguished for many years. Yi Shiwen even suspected that some of the gods might have already turned into corpses. Although there was a formation left by Emperor Qin back then, it was unclear how much effect it had after so many years. Good question. One of the young men said, Human, I'll give you a chance today. We are all princes of the Tian clan dynasty. Now we have a big shot who has taken a fancy to you and wants to take you as a slave. This is your honor. After that big shot came out, he hasn't taken a slave yet. You will become his first slave in the myriad heavens and realms. Then, the momentum didn't decrease, and it directly fell towards the young man on the spot. As if sensing that Yi Shiwen had broken in, a few young men and women suddenly flew over from afar and directly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. When facing Yi Shiwen, even though they were all divine kings, they didn't pay any attention to him, as if they were looking at an ant. These princes of the Tian clan were really like what was recorded in the ancient books, very arrogant and conceited. Human, I think you have really lost your mind. The young man looked at Yi Shiwen coldly, as if he was looking at a madman. Why, human, are the dignified princes of the Tian clan not enough to be your master? The young man said with a cold smile. What did you say? The young man's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had heard wrongly. He didn't expect Yi Shiwen to dare to say such words. And the status of the Tian clan dynasty was equivalent to the inheritance of the emperor in the world. Naturally, these princes of the Tian clan dynasty should be similar to the elders and elite disciples of the emperor's inheritance, which was equivalent to Ji Renwang's status in the martial sect. Tian clan dynasty? Yi Shiwen immediately understood. These people should be the experts of the Tian clan who ran out from the other side of the seal. No wonder there were so many experts. In particular, it happened to poke the most painful part in their hearts, which was that they had been exiled twice in a row. This was simply a great shame and humiliation. They were dignified Tian clan, the natural masters of the world, but they were actually exiled twice by slave. Was there any bigger joke than this? If this palm strike landed, even a god king would die a horrible death. If the allied forces that were chasing them were lowly ants, then what were they, who were being chased, considered? Vaguely, there was actually the martial arts of the Tianqi dynasty. Moreover, with the reputation of the Tian clan for so many years, after seeing that things were not going well, the other party should have immediately knelt down. Even if they met someone with backbone, they should have turned around and fled on the spot. Who knew that Yi Shiwen actually didn't have the slightest intention of escaping and actually dared to laugh at them? Even a king-ranked expert had to be sent to guard it, but they were still seriously injured and died. One could imagine how dangerous the god's tomb here was. Different from the remnants of the Tian clan, after being suppressed by the allied forces for countless years, the remnants of the Tian clan had completely restrained the arrogance in their hearts. However, they probably never expected that this human was thinking of how to capture all of them and torture them for the information he wanted. Otherwise, they would have completely fallen out with him. Take me as a slave? How dare you? Yi Shiwen laughed coldly. Chapter 28:01. This strike was invincible, and its momentum did not diminish as it headed straight for the young man's head. The young man wanted to struggle, but he was surprised to find that he was actually intimidated by the sword momentum. He could not move at all. This was simply impossible. For a person's aura to intimidate another person, it was only possible if the other person's cultivation was much higher than his. He was a dignified divine king, but he was actually intimidated by the aura of another divine king. This was simply a fantasy. It was simply impossible. Even if it was going to happen, it could only be reversed. His aura made it impossible for the other party to dodge. This was the most reasonable explanation. This sword momentum, Dominator's sword intent. Could it be that you are someone from the Dominator dynasty? Suddenly, the young man could not help but exclaim in horror. He immediately revealed the origin of this sword intent. For these princes, although they could not say that they knew the martial arts of the other dynasties like the back of their hands, they were still very clear about the Dominator's sword intent left behind by the Dominator emperors. In other words, it was not too difficult to say. However, even if he reacted, it was useless. Yi Shiwen's sword still fell instantly. Puchi! His fleshly body was easily torn in half like a piece of paper. Then, it exploded into a mist of blood that filled the sky. Just a single strike was enough to slay a god king alive. One sword. It was just one sword. All the princes and princesses of the celestial clans were completely dumbfounded. They had never expected such a situation to happen. This young man was considered very strong among them. Otherwise, he would not have become their leader. In the end, he was easily killed by Yi Shiwen just like that. Dominator's sword intent. The words that the young man left behind were still reverberating in their minds. How could a human learn the supreme martial arts of their celestial clans? Even in the Dominator dynasty, only a small number of people could learn the Dominator's sword intent, let alone the other races. It was simply rare to find someone who could cultivate to this level. This was the first time they had seen such a terrifying sword intent in their lives. Most importantly, in order to prevent their martial arts from being leaked to the outside world, these dynasties would leave a restriction in the minds of their successors. If anyone tried to search their memories or force them to speak, the restriction would immediately be activated and the person would instantly explode into pieces, causing them to die a miserable death. Although it was very cruel, it was an indispensable method for these dynasties. Otherwise, with so many descendants, these martial arts would be spread all over the world. Therefore, even after so many years, many of the things contained in these sword techniques, including some of the sword principles involved in the sword intent, had long been analyzed by others. However, the complete sword techniques had never been circulated, and it was impossible for others to learn them. This was their greatest trump card. Outsiders were not very clear about this. Only the imperial princes like them knew it the best because they had the same restriction on their bodies. These restrictions would explode them into pieces at the crucial moment. Although it was very cruel, it was a very good method. Very few people would try to explore these imperial martial arts because it was useless. Every prince who had inherited a martial art would have such a restriction. They were already used to it. At this time, seeing Yi Shiwen use the authentic Dominator's sword intent, they were shocked and panicked. Could it be that the remnants of the celestial clans had spread this martial art? This was the only possibility they could think of. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, how could a human divine king master this martial art? It was simply impossible. However, they clearly did not know that the man in front of them did not rely on torture to obtain this martial art. Just by exchanging blows, he had unexpectedly grasped a bit of the Dominator's sword intent, and then relied on this Dominator's sword intent to deduce the complete Dominator's sword intent. This was simply beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Even experienced and knowledgeable divine kings like them were incomparably terrified. Obviously, Yi Shiwen had no intention of telling them. Just like how the celestial princes regarded him as an ant, he did not care about these princes at all. Other than the use of asking for information, there was no other use at all. Not to mention that both sides were now in a state of irreconcilable enmity. The celestial clans wanted to cause chaos in the world, and a top expert like him was the first to bear the brunt. Now was the right time to take advantage of this good opportunity to capture all the imperial princes of the celestial clans in one fell swoop. These were the most elite members of the celestial clans. If all of them died here, perhaps the celestial clans would be hopping mad. Prince Xiaoyang! Those people exclaimed one after another. This was obviously the name of the person who had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Although their relationship was not very good, in general, it was still alright. Moreover, watching this person being killed in front of them made them feel even more sympathetic. They were so angry that they were trembling all over. Their blood was boiling and burning. You actually killed Prince Xiaoyang. You're dead. You're too audacious. You've offended the Tianqi dynasty. No, you've offended our celestial clan. There's no way for you to live in this world. This time, you must die. A woman trembled with anger. Her voice was extremely mournful. As a dignified imperial princess, her status in the imperial dynasty was not much lower than those princes. She was even an outstanding figure. Ordinary princes did not have a status as high as hers. Right now, she was actually frightened by a lowly ant. This was a complete humiliation. Go, kill him. Let him know the dignity of our celestial clan. At this moment, a young man shouted. He had already seen how ferocious Yi Shiwen was, especially the sword strike just now. It was simply not like that of an ordinary person. He could actually kill a divine king with a single strike. He did not even think too much about it. He only instinctively felt extreme danger. How could he still dare to go up alone? Naturally, he called the others to attack Yi Shiwen together. All of you die for me? Yi Shiwen roared. His entire body spewed out a strong sword intention, and then formed an incomparably huge sword character. It took the form of an ancient character, and it seemed as if a sword emperor had been reborn. Then, it shot towards the princes and princesses of these dynasties. Bang! 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 These princes and princes screamed as they were blasted into pieces. It was a tragic sight. They only had enough time to let out a miserable scream. They reassembled their bodies in the distance with difficulty. Then, they looked at Yi Shiwen in horror. When they joined forces, even a peak divine king would die with a grudge. At this moment, they could not do anything to this young man in front of them. Yi Shiwen stood with his hands behind his back. Then, he said, "How about it? Have you thought it through? I didn't kill you just now not because I couldn't kill you. I just wanted to give you a chance to redeem yourselves. Tell me the situation of the sealed land. Tell me everything you know. This way, I can even give you a chance to be my slave." You actually want us to redeem ourselves by doing meritorious deeds," a celestial prince roared. His face and ears were flushed. He was so angry that he was alive. It had always been them who let others redeem themselves by doing meritorious deed. Since when did they have such a day when someone said such words to them? What's more, even if they said it, it was only to be a slave. It was simply too much. He only felt that this human in front of him was simply too rampant. Obviously, he had completely forgotten how arrogant they were when they asked Yi Shiwen to kneel down and be their slave. For them, it was normal. If others treated them like this, it would be a heinous crime. "I will give you 3 seconds. If you miss it, you will die," Yi Shiwen said. His expression became indifferent. Anyway, there were still many princes and princesses inside. It was not a big deal for a few to die. On the contrary, it could deter those inside. 3, 2, 1. These princes and princesses were still in a state of extreme anger. No one had dared to be so presumptuous in front of them. There was no time to think. At this time, Yi Shiwen had already made his move. Swish! 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 The sword light formed in an instant, forming a huge word sword. Then, it blasted in all directions. Those princes and princesses screamed in horror. At this time, they finally remembered the fact that Yi Shiwen had just killed their companions with one sword. Moreover, he had also severely injured them with one sword. But it was too late. Yi Shiwen had absolutely no intention of showing mercy. "Stop!" At this time, an extremely angry voice came from the depths of the array. The voice was incomparably majestic. "Great Chaos Fist." Then, an incomparably huge fist descended from the sky. It had stimulated the power of the entire Great Matrix Array. It had blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it came crashing down towards Yi Shiwen. This was an attempt to intercept Yi Shiwen's offensive and rescue him. "No one can save the people that I want to kill." Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. The sword light was still unabated and slashed down. "Poochie! Poochie! Poochie!" These princes and princesses of various dynasties couldn't stop it at all. They screamed as they were slashed by the sword. This time, Yi Shiwen didn't show any mercy. It was impossible for them to resurrect. All their life imprints were directly cut off by the sword. They died instantly. At this time, the Great Chaos Fist finally arrived. Even with the help of the power of the array, it was still a step too late. At this time, it seemed to be angry out of shame. It directly fell towards Yi Shiwen's head. Yi Shiwen didn't move. There was no expression on his face. He looked at the Great Chaos Fist falling directly on top of his head. Chapter 2802. Bang! Yi Shiwen raised his hand and created a divine light that filled the sky, blocking this attack. The collision between the two sides even caused the entire sky to completely explode, and the energy exploded on the spot. However, it did not pose any threat to Yi Shiwen. He saw a young man dressed in a royal robe looking at Yi Shiwen with an arrogant expression. His expression was calm as he swept his eyes over Yi Shiwen and said, "How dare you ignore my words? Who do you think you are?" Yi Shiwen raised his eyes and glanced at the young man. He could see that the strength of this young man was much stronger than the princes and princesses from before. The young man was a little surprised. Yi Shiwen did not follow the rhythm he had set and did not follow his routine at all. Yi Shiwen did not answer his question at all, and on the contrary, he took a different path. "Human, from the moment you say this, it will be the moment of your death. The young man looked at him coldly. If I want to kill someone, no one can save you even if you escape to the heavens or the earth. You look like you have some status. You should not be an ordinary prince or princess. State your name. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes. I am the crown prince of the Central Dynasty. I let you know my name so that you will not die without knowing who killed you. The young man said coldly. His expression was very indifferent. What he said was the truth, and not a lie. The crown prince of the Central Dynasty. Very good, a little interesting. I just killed someone called the Central Heavenly King. He should also be considered a member of the Central Dynasty. It will be perfect if I kill another crown prince of the Central Dynasty, Yi Shiwen said with a grin. The Central Prince looked at him coldly and said, Human, are you trying to completely anger me? Do you know what kind of sin it is to completely anger me? Idiot. Yi Shiwen spat out these two words and continued, Could it be that the best education of the celestial race has produced an idiot like you? How dare you? The veins on the Central Prince's face suddenly bulged, and he was clearly angered by Yi Shiwen. Central Prince, you are so arrogant, but now you are being insulted, and yet you are not doing anything. What a joke. At this time, there was another flash of light. A young man wearing a Tao diagram walked out. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes slightly when he saw the pattern on his clothes, because he had seen this pattern before. It was the pattern of the Myriad Worlds diagram. He had once fought with the artifact spirit of the Myriad Worlds diagram. He would never forget this pattern. The identity of this young man was obvious. He was the crown prince of the Myriad Worlds dynasty. What a coincidence! They were all descendants of old friends whom he had fought with before. Humph, crown prince of the Myriad Realms, you are not allowed to interfere in my affairs, the Central Crown Prince said coldly. This time, with our empires working together, I'll definitely find Emperor Qin's primordial spirit avatar before you. When I devour it, I'll definitely be one step ahead of you. Emperor Qin's primordial spirit avatar. Yi Shiwen's eyes suddenly became sharp. Sure enough, they had come for the Qin Emperor. With their status and strength, ordinary items wouldn't be able to attract them, so this was the only way. Central Crown Prince, you are too confident. When the time comes, it's not certain who will be able to seize the Qin Emperor's primordial spirit avatar. The Crown Prince sneered. This time, the empires had joined forces. If it wasn't for the Qin Emperor's primordial spirit avatar, they would not have joined forces. Although they were all from the celestial races, they belonged to different empires and were usually in a competitive relationship. It was impossible for them to cooperate with each other. Even if they cooperated now, they would be on guard against each other. It was impossible for them to be completely confident. The outside world did not expect such a genius like the Qin Emperor to appear. Even our celestial race did not gain a new emperor after the Second War. But the Qin Emperor was able to break through the shackles of heaven and earth and achieve this. He is indeed extraordinary. The Crown Prince of the Central Region sighed. Although they were enemies, a person of that level wasn't someone they could slander. What's the use of that? Everything he left behind is now ours. The Crown Prince laughed loudly. Hurry up and get rid of this human. Otherwise, don't say that I didn't wait for you. The Central Crown Prince said coldly. You don't need to remind me of this. I naturally understand. You guys are very confident. Yi Shiwen stepped forward and said, What Crown Prince? Your status should be much higher than those princes and princesses. Who was the one who said that he wanted to take me as a slave? The Crown Prince was a little angry when he saw that Yi Shiwen dared to refute him. However, he immediately said, It was the Sovereign Crown Prince who wanted to take you as a slave. He said that he sensed the aura of his own kind from you. It seems like you learned the ruler's sword intent. You're lucky. But now that you've offended me, it's useless even if the Sovereign Crown Prince wants to spare your life. Yes, that's right. You've completely lost your chance," the Central Crown Prince said coldly. "Let me deal with you first," the Central Crown Prince sneered. His big hand suddenly moved, and rays of light flew out in an instant. Then, they formed a layer of golden clouds, and instantly bombarded towards Yi Shiwen. A pure golden kingdom appeared everywhere, as if it was cast out of gold. In Yi Shiwen's hand, the ruler's sword intent erupted and swept out. It pierced through the sky and directly cut the golden kingdom in half. The Central Crown Prince's attack was instantly broken. As Yi Shiwen said this, the ruler's sword intent in his hand exploded even more, shaking space and time. In an instant it ruthlessly attacked the Central Crown Prince. The Central Crown Prince was instantly enraged. With a roar, he transformed into the Central Emperor's body. His spiritual power skyrocketed, and his aura became unimaginably tyrannical. In this instant, he was the only overlord in the universe, invincible and unstoppable. This was the Central Emperor's body, the unparalleled secret art of the Central Dynasty. In Yi Shiwen's hands, it was far more powerful than in the hands of the Central Heavenly King. This was because the Central Heavenly King was only a peak divine king of the 10 great divine kings, but the Central Crown Prince was different. He was an invincible quasi-emperor who had truly stepped into the quasi-emperor realm. His strength was naturally extraordinary. After the Central Crown Prince transformed into the Central Emperor's body, he pounced towards Yi Shiwen even more fiercely, not giving him any chance to breathe. Bang! 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 Both sides clashed countless times in the void. In an instant, who knew how many thousands of moves had been exchanged? The naked eye could see through their movement. On the other side, the Crown Prince of Myriad Realms was completely shocked. This was because he and the Central Crown Prince had been fighting each other for countless years. He naturally knew how powerful the Central Crown Prince's Central Emperor's body was. It could be said that once it was used, one's strength would increase by a large margin in an instant. Even he couldn't gain the upper hand against the Central Crown Prince after he used the Central Emperor's body. In fact, he might even be suppressed. Even so, the Central Crown Prince still couldn't suppress this human. It was as if the Central Emperor's body's increase in strength was insignificant to him. Not good. He could clearly see that the Central Crown Prince was gradually falling into a disadvantageous position. To him, this was simply unbelievable. It should be said that once the Central Crown Prince used the Central Emperor's body, even if he couldn't defeat his opponent, he could at least protect himself. He was already in an invincible position. Therefore, he had a headache fighting the Central Crown Prince several times. He had to think of a way to fight against the Central Crown Prince. But now, the Central Crown Prince was actually starting to show an obvious disadvantage. In every collision, the Central Crown Prince didn't gain the upper hand at all. Instead, he gradually began to struggle and kept retreating. Although this was a very small margin, it couldn't be hidden from him. His eyes widened in disbelief. How is this possible? You should know that this is the Central Crown Prince, not some random cat or dog on the side of the road. He looked at Yi Shiwen in astonishment. This human divine king was actually able to suppress the Central Crown Prince who used the Central Emperor's body with the body of an ordinary divine king. If such a person was allowed to grow, it would simply be a disaster. Could it be that the human race was really going to have a new Emperor Lord? His eyes flashed with ferocity as he thought of this. I can't let him continue to grow. Although he didn't get along with the Central Crown Prince, and they were usually competitors, he also understood that all of his power and wealth was built on the fact that the celestial race was invincible. If someone from the human race became an Emperor Lord, then the great situation they were currently in would be ruined in a matter of minutes. He didn't want to return to the place where he was exiled. Although that place had been built by countless ancestors of the celestial race and had become habitable, it was only habitable. How could it be compared to the fertile land of the myriad heavens and myriad realms? His cultivation power rose in an instant, and he was about to join the battle. Suddenly, a miserable shriek rang out. The crown prince shot backwards like a comet, smashing heavily into the formation. The terrifying force even caused the formation formed from the 99 supreme quality god artifacts to shake, almost shattering. This is the moment! The Myriad Realms Crown Prince roared as a picture of the Myriad Realms chart appeared around him. Then, with lightning speed, it shot towards Yi Shiwen. Chapter 2803. The Myriad Realms Crown Prince's attack instantly blasted towards Yi Shiwen. This was a martial art passed down from their ancestors, and it used the Myriad Realms diagram as its foundation. In other words, the Myriad Realms diagram itself was refined for this purpose. Humph, just in time. Let's kill him together. Yi Shiwen sneered coldly. He did not panic. With such a quasi-emperor beside him, even if he was careless, he would still keep a close eye on him. Yi Shiwen waved his hand, which turned into a sky-flipping seal, and smashed down on the spot. Boom! The Myriad Worlds diagram and the sky-flipping seal collided directly. This shocking collision produced an endless shockwave that spread out in all directions. Thump, thump, thump. At this time, the Crown Prince of the Myriad Realms actually retreated several steps. It was only now that he finally understood why the Central Crown Prince was at a complete disadvantage against this human. The human in front of him could not be judged by normal standard. An ordinary divine king, even if it was their own divine king, would not be his match at all. He could take them down in one move. Even if it was an expert of the so-called 10 great divine king level, to them, it would only be slightly troublesome. As a crown prince who had stepped into the quasi-emperor realm, he had this confidence. However, when facing Yi Shiwen, this law was completely useless. This divine king could actually fight a quasi-emperor, and not only was he not at a disadvantage, he even had the upper hand. He was simply a monster. The crown prince was going crazy. In a pure competition of strength, he, a dignified quasi-emperor, was actually at a complete disadvantage. He was not a match for Yi Shiwen. Interesting. Yi Shiwen laughed heartily, and once again rushed up to kill. A sword swept through the sky, and the terrifying sword light pierced through the entire world. Then, it tore a huge crack in the world that was enveloped by the formation and directly crashed down. Boom! The Myriad Worlds diagram flew out from the top of the Crown Prince's head and directly collided with the ruler's sword intent. Boom! It was an even more shocking collision. This time, the Crown Prince of the Myriad Realms felt that his legs could not hold on any longer, and it was possible that he would kneel down. Impossible! How could this be? The Crown Prince of the Myriad Realms was furious. He had never suffered such a big loss before, and now, he had suffered such a big loss because of Yi Shiwen. Why is it impossible? There's always a higher mountain, and there's always a higher mountain. You don't even understand this principle? What a joke! Yi Shiwen shouted and attacked. The Celestials had long been immersed in the glory of the past and could not extricate themselves. Their history and glory were indeed enough to make them proud, but the past was the past, and they didn't understand this truth. They could not accept that a mortal was actually stronger than them. Go, let's go together and kill him! The Central Crown Prince had already returned to the battlefield. The huge wound on his body was rapidly healing. He had been struck by Yi Shiwen's sword during the fight just now, and his entire body had almost been split in half. If he was prince, and Yi down, he would have been. Divine king to God. The Central Crown Prince was furious. The Central Emperor's body on his body completely erupted. It was incomparably ferocious. He took the lead and charged towards Yi Shiwen. Above his head, the word Central appeared. This was the center of the universe, and also the most powerful force in the universe. They had cut it off and taken out the word Central. This was the supreme great Tao that the Central Emperor had comprehended. The Central Emperor had used this to become one of the strongest emperors of the celestial race. At this time, the power in the hands of the Central Emperor was not small. Interesting. Yi Shiwen laughed and was not afraid. In today's chaotic world, the best way for him to improve his strength was to fight with these top experts. There were not many opportunities like this. 6 paths of reincarnation suppress the world. Yi Shiwen roared, and the 6 paths of reincarnation fist blasted out. This time, he used the 6 paths of reincarnation fist, and the 6 paths of reincarnation came crashing down. Boom! The 6 paths of reincarnation and the word central collided. This was a collision that involved the origin of the universe. When the two collided, the entire universe trembled and roared. The resulting violent energy hurricane bombarded in all directions, and the entire formation began to shake violently. Eat my attack! The Crown Prince came crashing down on the Myriad Worlds diagram. Dominate the world! Yi Shiwen slashed down with the sword in his left hand, colliding with the Crown Prince's Myriad Worlds diagram. Rumble! A series of explosions occurred. Yi Shiwen's ruler's sword will easily blocked the Crown Prince's Myriad Worlds diagram. At this time, the Central Crown Prince's astonishing attack broke out again. Boom! 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 In an instant, the entire universe was left with the shocking collision between them. Facing the surprise attack of the 2 Crown Princes and Quasi-Emperors, Yi Shiwen was actually able to fight against them alone. Whether it was the Central Crown Prince or the Crown Prince, they no longer looked down on Yi Shiwen. On the contrary, there was complete shock and disbelief in their eyes. Not only was he not a match for Yi Shiwen in a one-on-one fight, but he was also unable to gain the upper hand even in a 2-on-1 fight. How was this possible? Either one of their attacks was enough to make all Quasi-Emperors tremble in fear. But when Yi Shiwen faced their attacks, he was able to easily defeat them. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist and ruler's sword will had reached their peak in their hands. Sometimes they could lift something heavy as if it were light, sometimes they could lift something light as if it were heavy. Sometimes they could launch a crazy surprise attack like a storm, and sometimes they could resolve their attacks without the slightest trace of smoke or fire. These 2 situations that should not have appeared at the same time had appeared in Yi Shiwen's hands. His attacks were like a storm, and there was not the slightest trace of smoke or fire. What was even more terrifying was his astonishing power. Every time he attacked, the sky seemed to collapse. When the attacks landed on their bodies, they were shocked. Gradually, they found that their bodies seemed to be a little numb and stiff. Opposite them, Yi Shiwen did not seem to feel anything. His attacks did not have the slightest hint of disorder, and they continued to attack. Bang! The Central Crown Prince was the first to be unable to bear it. He was once again hit in the face by Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation fist. His entire body flew out and fell into the divine tomb. He had injuries on his body that had not yet recovered. In the battle between the two, Yi Shiwen was completely focused on him, trying to find a breakthrough from him. Sure enough, after the two had exchanged countless blows, the Central Crown Prince gradually became more and more disadvantaged. Finally, a fatal flaw appeared, and he was hit by Yi Shiwen's punch. His Central Emperor body also completely collapsed in the void, turning into a sky full of energy waves that spread in all directions. On the other side, without the Central Crown Prince to restrain Yi Shiwen, the Myriad Realm Crown Prince began to fall into a disadvantageous position. He was not Yi Shiwen's match at all. After a few rounds, he was already flustered. In particular, Yi Shiwen's Sovereign Sword Intent and 6 paths of reincarnation fist made him even more depressed. He had never met such an opponent before. 4 ordinary people, being able to cultivate the Sovereign Sword Intent or the 6 paths of reincarnation fist was already something to be proud of. It could be said that they were extremely lucky. However, Yi Shiwen had actually cultivated two completely different kinds of martial arts to the pinnacle of perfection. All of his attacks were at his fingertips, and there was not the slightest bit of difficulty in them. Such a shocking scene was something he had never seen in his life. Among the people he had seen in the past, no one in his generation could compete with him. Bang! The Myriad Realm Crown Prince finally could not resist anymore. His entire body was blasted thousands of miles away by Yi Shiwen. If he had not used the Myriad Realm diagram at the critical moment to block the attack, he was afraid that he would not be much better off than the Central Crown Prince. Sovereign Crown Prince, are you going to watch the two of us get killed? This human is cruel and merciless. If we die, you won't be any better off. The Myriad Realm Crown Prince roared and headed towards the depths of the formation. Humph! A cold snort came from the depths of the formation. Then, a shocking sword intent blasted through everything and directly slashed towards Yi Shiwen. It was the Sovereign Sword Intent. Pure Sovereign Sword Intent. Bang! Yi Shiwen did not dodge or evade. He took a step forward and then blasted out a punch. Unexpectedly, the sword intention was dispersed on the spot, and then the sword intention was absorbed by his fist. It was also the Sovereign Sword Intent, and it was almost of the same origin. After Yi Shiwen absorbed it, he felt that he had gained something else. It was different from the Sovereign Sword Intent that Yi Shiwen had derived on his own. This was the purest Sovereign Sword Intent that had been imparted to him. Human, I don't know how you obtained our Sovereign Sword Intent, but you have already rejected the olive branch that I extended just now. This means that you have chosen death. A cold voice came from the depths of the formation. Then, a figure slowly emerged. Another middle-aged man in an imperial robe stepped out. It was the Crown Prince Dominator. He looked more mature than the Crown Prince of the Myriad Realms and the Central Crown Prince. He also seemed to be more dangerous. He had the aura of a ruler who ruled the world and ruled over the Myriad Realms. Yi Shiwen could not be more familiar with this aura. This was the aura that would be produced when the Sovereign Sword Intent was cultivated to an extremely high level. Chapter 2804. This was something that would only happen when the Sovereign Lord's sword intent had a profound influence. Yi Shiwen, on the other hand, was different. He was controlling the Sovereign Lord's sword intent instead of letting it affect him. This was his most unique martial path. Crown Prince Dominator, don't waste your breath on him. This guy must be a peerless genius of the human race. If we don't kill him, he'll be a huge threat to the entire celestial race in the future. The Central Crown Prince shouted from afar. After being severely injured by Yi Shiwen in succession, the Central Crown Prince felt even more depressed. Clang! Before he finished speaking, the Crown Prince Dominator made his move. A 10,000 feet long sword light shot out, piercing through everything and smashing everything in its path. In an instant, it had already penetrated Yi Shiwen's face. This attack was tyrannical to the extreme. The Sovereign Lord's sword intent completely erupted at this moment. Clang! Just as the sword was about to pierce through Yi Shiwen finally made his move. The sword light rushed out on the spot, forming the word sword above his head, and then slashed downwards. Boom! It was as if two incomparably huge beams of light had collided. No one could imagine how terrifying it would be when these two sword lights collided. Walla lala! The entire formation was like a thin piece of paper. In the aftermath of the terrifying sword-light collision, it constantly swept and trembled. The Crown Prince Dominator's cultivation in the Sovereign Lord's sword intent far exceeded that of anyone Yi Shiwen had seen before. He had a more detailed inheritance, and he had directly cultivated this Sovereign Lord's sword technique to an astonishing level. Whoosh! In this frenzied aftermath, a sword light followed closely, breaking through the chaos and slashing towards Yi Shiwen. He wanted to seize the initiative and use continuous attacks to defeat Yi Shiwen. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted softly. Seeing the sword light pouncing towards him, he didn't hesitate at all. His right hand instantly transformed into the sky-flipping seal, and he smashed it down fiercely. Hong long long long! A series of shocking explosions rang out. The martial path laws of both sides manifested, strangling each other and annihilating everything. Don't even think about seizing the initiative. Yi Shiwen immediately saw through the opponent's plan. At his level, he could see many things at a glance. Therefore, he immediately threw a punch. The six paths roulette was formed instantly and swept towards the Crown Prince Sovereign as if it was tearing through the sky. Behind the Crown Prince Sovereign, the projection of a powerful sovereign emperor instantly appeared. The moment it appeared, it blocked Yi Shiwen's attack with indomitable might. Yi Shiwen immediately discovered that compared to the other two, the Crown Prince Dominator was slightly stronger. His cultivation was probably close to the intermediate stage of the Quasi-Emperor realm and had reached the peak of the initial stage of the Quasi-Emperor realm. The Sovereign Emperor's avatar blocked Yi Shiwen's attack as soon as it appeared. Then, it turned around and suppressed Yi Shiwen. The sword radiance traversed the sky like a rainbow bridge floating in the universe, spanning thousands of miles. Not to be outdone, Yi Shiwen also released his Sovereign and Emperor incarnation and clashed with his opponent on the spot. The two Sovereign Emperors seemed to have been resurrected from a distant era, walking out of the river of time and reviving in the present. Moreover, it wasn't just one, but two. Such a shocking collision scene was almost unimaginable. The Crown Prince Sovereign, in particular, was a little stunned. He only knew that Yi Shiwen had cultivated the ruler's sword technique. Although he didn't know where Yi Shiwen had obtained this technique, there was no way Yi Shiwen could be more orthodox than someone like him, who had personally received pointers from a sovereign emperor. Even if Yi Shiwen had obtained it from the sovereign dynasty outside, it would be useless. After all, the sovereign dynasty was only a branch family. Compared to the cultivation techniques in their hands, it could not be more comprehensive. However, he never would have imagined that he would actually be able to manifest the illusory images of hegemons and emperors. This wasn't something that could be described as stolen. Impossible. How can you condense the projection of a sovereign and emperor? The Crown Prince Sovereign exclaimed in shock. He couldn't believe it. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have believed it. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly and didn't say anything else. However, the projection of a sovereign and emperor that he had condensed continued to solidify. Gradually, the aura emitted from his body surpassed that of the Crown Prince Sovereign. Bang! 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 In the universe, the shocking battle was still ongoing. However, the sovereign and emperor that the Crown Prince Sovereign had condensed was being beaten back. He was no match for Yi Shiwen at all. What a powerful force! The Crown Prince of Central took advantage of this opportunity to heal his injuries. However, he had been paying attention to the battle over there. In the end, he was also being beaten back by Yi Shiwen's tyrannical sovereign's sword intent cultivation. Am I seeing things? The Crown Prince Sovereign has actually been defeated in the sovereign sword technique. The Crown Prince of Myriad Realms was also in complete disbelief. What a joke. It wasn't the first time they had fought with the Crown Prince Sovereign. They had basically never gained any advantage. In fact, they were basically in a disadvantageous state. Of the three Crown Princes, the Crown Prince Hegemon was indeed stronger than them. The next day, the two dynasties would most likely start an internal strife, and that would be the start of a civil war. In this world, no one can save you anymore. You will face countless vengeance and relentless pursuit. The Central Crown Prince's lips were trembling. At this moment, he really felt a kind of extreme fear. In the past, they controlled the life and death of others. At this moment, their life and death were actually controlled by someone else. How could they not be scared? Although they had transcended life and death, They were still completely terrified when it came to deciding life and death. Yes, it is indeed a bit troublesome. Therefore I will kill all of you. Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed fiercely. What the two crown princes said was indeed troublesome. Even if he was confident that he could escape from the crazy revenge of the sky race, he couldn't escape from the hidden valley. Not only could he not escape, but more importantly, the hidden alliance that he had painstakingly established would probably collapse at any moment. Therefore, the best way was to kill all of them and silence them. When that time came, he would have the time robe to conceal the heavenly secret. Even an Emperor Lord would not be able to predict anything if he was one step ahead. You! How dare you! The Central Crown Prince didn't expect that his words not only didn't make Yi Shiwen cower in fear, but instead aroused his killing intent. If it were him, he might have made the same choice. However, the person who was going to be killed was him, so the situation was completely different. Kill him! Fight him to the death! The Central Crown Prince was furious and roared on the spot. The entire universe trembled under his roar, constantly shaking. In the sky, the 99 top-grade artifacts also responded to his call. They formed an incomparably huge array and bombarded towards Yi Shiwen. These 99 top-grade artifacts seemed to be burning themselves as they charged towards Yi Shiwen. They didn't care even if they had to sacrifice themselves to kill 1,000 enemies. Top-grade artifacts? Just nice. I can use them to equip the Demon Kings in the Demon Flag. Yi Shiwen wasn't shocked. Chapter 2805. These 99 supreme-grade divine artifacts were also a huge fortune. Even with Yi Shiwen's current status, he could not take out 99 supreme-grade divine artifacts. Even the entire Secret Alliance did not have that many God Kings. Yi Shiwen decided in an instant that he would use these artifacts to equip the Demon Clan army in his Demon Flag. This was because this army was completely under his control. Unlike the Hidden Alliance, there were many people in the Hidden Alliance who had different ambitions. Even in the Hidden Valley, Yi Shiwen didn't dare to say that everyone would respect him. In a short period of time, these 99 top-quality divine artifacts could not appear in the world. Otherwise, once the Tian clan discovered them, they would truly face endless pursuit. Although it was the general trend to fight against the Heavenly Clan now, he definitely didn't want to attract the attention of the Heavenly Clan before he and the entire Hidden Alliance had fully developed. Only the heavens and realms could fight against the Heavenly Clan. How could he really fight against the incomparably powerful Heavenly Clan with his strength alone? Not to mention the incomparably powerful Emperor Lords of the Heavenly Clan, even a few random old antiques would be enough to make Yi Shiwen suffer in his current situation. He had to seize time and take advantage of the beginning of this chaotic world to completely develop himself. In the future, he would soar into the sky and amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Thinking of this, he didn't hesitate at all. On the spot, an astonishing light burst out from the time robe. The law of time formed a huge hand and directly grabbed out on the spot. The 99 top-grade artifacts that were rushing down didn't have the chance to explode with amazing power. They were instantly grabbed by Yi Shiwen using the power of time. Without an owner, the 99 top-grade artifacts couldn't explode with their true power at all. They were instantly grabbed by Yi Shiwen. Roar! 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 The moment the artifact spirits in these top-grade artifacts were captured, they automatically recovered. Most of them had owners, but they were just borrowed by these princes and princesses. Who would have thought that such a thing would happen? In an instant, all of them exploded. However, these exploded just in time. It was exactly what Yi Shiwen wanted. Immediately, countless time hands appeared, directly grabbed the artifact spirits in their hands, and crushed them. Without these tool spirits wreaking havoc, the remaining top-grade divine tools couldn't resist Yi Shiwen's suppression even if they had some spirituality. They were easily suppressed. The Crown Prince of Central was completely dumbfounded. How was this possible? He thought that even if the best quality divine tool couldn't fight against Yi Shiwen, it could at least buy him enough time. Who would have thought that it would be suppressed in an instant? Of course, this had a lot to do with the fact that there was no master presiding over it. But even so, Yi Shiwen's terror had far exceeded his expectations. A Dao artifact. This is the aura of a Dao artifact. You actually have a Dao artifact on you. The myriad world crown prince immediately reacted. That terrifying aura just now was clearly the aura of a Dao treasure. This was definitely not wrong. Ordinary Tian clan might not be able to recognize the aura of a Dao artifact, but existences of their level, how could they not know anything about Dao artifacts? Although every single Dao artifact was different, the essence contained within them was completely the same. Thus, it was very easy to distinguish them. If they had known that Yi Shiwen possessed a Dao tool, then they wouldn't have fought with Yi Shiwen. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? What a joke. Such a terrifying existence also possessed a Dao tool. How terrifying was that? When the myriad world crown prince heard this, he was also terrified. There weren't many Dao tools in the world. Although the younger generation had also stepped into the quasi-emperor realm, it was absolutely impossible for them to lay their hands on a Dao tool. No wonder this human was completely fearless from the beginning. With a Dao tool, he was indeed not someone they could fight against. What they didn't know was that Yi Shiwen also consumed a lot of Emperor Source to activate the time robe. In a situation where he couldn't condense Emperor Source, he wouldn't use the time robe if he didn't have to. As his final trump card, he could save a lot of resources. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen would have used the time robe to suppress them all. Roar! 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 Loud roars came from the deity's tomb. In the sky, the roars of countless undead creatures could be heard. Cracks began to appear on the formation. Originally, the formation could be said to be as stable as Mount Tai with the suppression of the 99 best quality divine tools. The reanimated gods and evil creatures couldn't escape at all. But now that Yi Shiwen had absorbed the 99 best quality divine tools, it naturally couldn't suppress them anymore. The entire formation shook violently. The entire universe was like boiling water. A terrifying aura was boiling within it. Now, go! The central crown prince roared and fled into the distance. Although the myriad world crown prince didn't say anything, his speed wasn't slow either. He fled on the spot. Want to leave? All of you stay here, Yi Shiwen sneered. His ruler's sword intent condensed above his head. After absorbing the crown prince's ruler's sword intent, Yi Shiwen's ruler's sword intent had grown a bit stronger. Then, it split into two huge sword lights that slashed down like a mountain range. Poochie! Poochie! The two screamed as they were cut in half on the spot. Their entire bodies turned into a cloud of blood mist. This cloud of blood mist actually wanted to escape into the distance. It hadn't died yet. It wanted to reform in the distance. But how could Yi Shiwen give them this opportunity? He immediately used the time robe and grabbed the two clouds of blood mist. The two wanted to escape, but how could they escape the pursuit of the time robe? They screamed on the spot and were completely obliterated. Their primordial spirits were destroyed. Initially, Yi Shiwen didn't want to use the time robe. However, both of them were very cunning. They had fled in two completely different directions. With Yi Shiwen's current strength, killing them naturally wouldn't be a problem. However, he could only kill one of them. The other one would escape from their hands. Thinking of the danger after they escaped, Yi Shiwen naturally wouldn't give them such an opportunity. After beheading the two crown princes, Yi Shiwen didn't delay and directly rushed into the depths of the Zhen method. He saw that there were more than 20 princes and princesses in the depths of the Zhen method. All of them were fighting against powerful undead creatures. At this time, they seemed to be in a bit of a difficult situation. Without the support of the three crown princes, it would be difficult for them to fight against the undead creatures with their current strength. Although the undead creatures were inanimate, they had spiritual wisdom. They naturally understood that they must take advantage of this opportunity to break out of the encirclement. Otherwise, when the three men returned, they would die. The undead creatures were only relatively speaking. If the quasi-emperors were to attack, then they would be annihilated. The princes and princesses also noticed that someone was coming. When they looked back, they were almost scared to death. The person who came wasn't one of the three crown princes. In fact, it wasn't even one of the people they were familiar with. It was a complete stranger. This meant that the people who went out to resist the invasion were already dead. Thinking that the three crown princes and the other princes were dead, the rest of the people were completely shocked. They were stunned. Not to mention that countless people would be shocked. Just the fact that Yi Shiwen was able to behead the three crown princes was an incomparably terrifying thing for them. The undead creatures also felt the powerful aura that Yi Shiwen exuded. One after another, they bared their teeth and roared at Yi Shiwen. "Humph, a group of evil creatures," Yi Shiwen said coldly. The power of time instantly surged out from his body. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Behind him, the 6 paths of reincarnation roulette instantly formed. Then, it rotated crazily. Countless terrifying punches bombarded out. Even an emperor wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack with the power of time, let alone these ordinary god kings. Bang! 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 The princes and princesses of the celestial race and the undead creatures didn't even have the time to scream before they died tragically. Their bodies turned into a mass of blood mist and exploded on the spot. They were completely annihilated by a single punch. For Yi Shiwen, both sides were scourges. No matter which side it was a target to be annihilated. Naturally, he killed all of them regardless of who they were. However, this attack also consumed more than 10,000 Emperor Source. It could be said that the consumption was huge. It made him grimace in pain. However, the entire Divine Tombs area was cleared at this time. Many divine tombs collapsed in front of Yi Shiwen. These divine tombs were formed automatically by the heaven and earth. They were formed around the dead gods. Now that the corporeal bodies of those dead gods no longer existed, naturally, they could not spontaneously form the godly tombs. Half of the godly tombs that had been formed for countless years had collapsed, and the remaining half had not undergone any corpse transformation or produced any evil spirits. However, it could be seen from this that the situation of the entire group of divine tombs was very bad. It was no wonder that even the 4 great human kings had fallen in this place. There was no lack of formidable god-king-level corpse kings among those who had been killed by Yi Shiwen. If Yi Shiwen's current cultivation hadn't reached a shocking level, it would have been impossible for him to kill all of them. After cleaning up, Yi Shiwen instantly unfolded his demon wings and began to fly towards the core of the divine tombs. However, he saw a figure sitting in the core area of the divine tombs. It was a vague figure, but it had a monstrous aura. Looking at it from afar, it made people feel a kind of shocking feeling. It's Emperor Qin's soul incarnation. Yi Shiwen sensed it immediately. Previously, he had also obtained a small part of Emperor Qin's energy inheritance. It directly saved him who was about to die. How could he not know? Chapter 2806. Yi Shiwen easily judged that it should be the spirit avatar left behind by the Qin Emperor. Although this was a battlefield left behind by the Qin Emperor to suppress strong enemies in his early years, the Qin Emperor should have returned again and used the spirit avatar to suppress this place. However, at this time, the spirit avatar left behind by the Qin Emperor was only left with a mass of energy. The spirit had long been erased, but the terrifying coercion of the body was still suppressing in all directions. It seemed that it was slowly erased by the corpse kings in the battlefield over the endless years. Otherwise, the 4 kings of the Desolation era wouldn't have died here. Yi Shiwen didn't know how the princes and princesses of the heavenly clans got the news and actually came to cause trouble. Yi Shiwen flew in front of the spirit avatar of the Qin Emperor, cupped his hands and said, "Senior Qin Emperor, I'm facing an urgent situation now. I have no choice but to ask for your help. I hope you don't mind." As soon as Yi Shiwen's voice fell, the terrifying coercion around the spirit avatar of the Qin Emperor instantly dissipated completely. Yi Shiwen knew that this was recognition of his actions. The last trace of the true spirit was also erased, leaving only a mass of pure energy. This was the energy left behind by an Emperor Lord. Even the princes of the various dynasties came to look for it when they got the news, thinking that it could help them advance further. One could imagine how powerful it was. If Yi Shiwen didn't have the ability, there would definitely be a shocking war after the princes obtained this spirit avatar. But now, all of this belonged to Yi Shiwen. He was extremely excited. As long as he devoured and digested this spirit avatar of the Qin Emperor, he would advance further. Truly reaching the level of a peak divine king, this was something even more precious than the Emperor Source. There were still many Emperor Source in the various Emperor Lords' inheritances. However, under normal circumstances, the spirit avatar of an Emperor Lord would be worshipped as an ancestor. How could it be devoured by others? His return this time was really fruitful. To him, who was determined to rise in this chaotic world, this was undoubtedly the best gift. Yi Shiwen grabbed Emperor Qin's soul incarnation and put it into the time robe. Only the time robe could accommodate the soul incarnation of an Emperor Lord. Yi Shiwen didn't leave immediately after he had captured the soul of Emperor Qin. Instead, he arranged an incomparably huge array formation above the entire battlefield. He then left after he had enveloped the entire battlefield. This was also to prevent any evil spirits from coming out of the array formation and possibly wreaking havoc in the world. In this battlefield, the Yin Qi was too strong. No one knew what would happen in the future, and it might happen in the future. Back then, when he was suppressed by the great Qin Emperor, there were not so many problems. Later on, these problems occurred. Moreover, considering the level of martial strength of the nearby worlds, it was possible to cause the destruction of the world if any of the fallen gods were to undergo a corpse transformation. Yi Shiwen could almost imagine it. Therefore, he had no choice but to prepare in advance. Yi Shiwen set out to return to the Hidden Valley after completing these tasks. At this time, everyone in the Hidden Valley was still immersed in the joy of defeating a quasi-emperor for the first time and was still distributing the spoils of war on a large scale. These celestial race experts who had raided the Hidden Valley had a lot of good things on them, enough to give the entire Hidden Valley a lot of benefit. In their hearts, they were even more confident in following Yi Shiwen. The benefits were already obvious. Yi Shiwen had just returned and immediately went to find the Hidden King. The Hidden King, who had just broken through to the 10 Great King realm, was even more high-spirited at this time. Yi Shiwen didn't need to say much to properly manage the Hidden Valley. "Senior brother Hidden King, I will be entering closed-door training for a period of time. During this period, I hope that you will not disturb me as much as possible. This period of time is very important to me," said Yi Shiwen. "What, junior brother, you are going to enter closed-door training?" The Hidden King was a little unprepared after hearing the news from Yi Shiwen. The Hidden Alliance had just been established, and it was time to vigorously develop. Besides the Hidden Valley, which was the backbone of the Hidden Alliance, there was only the Baichen family. Now, the most important person in the Hidden Alliance, Yi Shiwen, was actually going to enter closed-door training. This immediately caught the Hidden King unprepared. "Don't worry, senior brother. I'm only going to enter closed-door training. It's not a life-or-death closed-door training. If there's any trouble that you can't solve, you can still look for me." Yi Shiwen saw the Hidden King's worry, and couldn't help but smile. Of course, the Hidden King also knew what Yi Shiwen was talking about. However, it wasn't a good thing for closed-door training to come out of the Middle Earth after failing. He had already made up his mind to not disturb Yi Shiwen unless it was absolutely necessary. Yi Shiwen was now the backbone of the entire Hidden Valley. The stronger he was, the more benefits the Hidden Valley would receive. Naturally, the Hidden King wouldn't object to this. "All right," the Hidden King nodded and said. "Senior brother Hidden King, you don't need to belittle yourself. Although I'm going to enter closed-door training during this period of time, you're no longer the same as before. If we really fight, there aren't many people in the entire heavens who would dare to say that they can suppress you," Yi Shiwen said with a smile. The Hidden King was startled in his heart. Indeed, he didn't know when he had started to think about relying on Yi Shiwen. The entire Hidden Valley had always been relying on him. Therefore, he had always performed very strongly. Now that Yi Shiwen had become his successor, and his performance was even more outstanding than his, he had gradually lost his original lofty aspirations. Of course, it wasn't to the extent that he was completely useless. It was just that he had started to get used to relying on Yi Shiwen to solve many things. This wasn't a good habit, especially for someone like him who was once a mighty lord whose name had shaken the world. It was even more of a bad thing. With his current strength, he could be considered as a top-notch figure in the entire heavens. "But if a quasi-emperor personally attacks, what should we do?" the Hidden King said. He didn't have to worry about ordinary divine kings. Even if it was a surprise attack from an expert of the 10 great divine kings level, he wouldn't be worried. He was even a little eager to test how tyrannical his newly improved strength was. But if it was a surprise attack from a quasi-emperor, then the situation would be completely different. "Senior brother, are you confused? Now that the heavenly race is busy invading various places, even if a quasi-emperor comes out, they will have to face the surprise attack and counterattack of the various emperor inheritances. How would they have time to care about a small place like ours? Even if it's related, they have to think twice. After the death of the 100-eyed giant, they should know the severity of the situation," Yi Shiwen said. The Hidden King thought about it, and it was true. In front of a colossus like the heavenly race, the Hidden Valley was at best a small character. If it wasn't for Yi Shiwen's Avicii sword swallowing the Tianqi Emperor sword, it wouldn't have attracted much attention. It was already very rare to send a heavenly race expert of the 10 great divine kings level. Now that the heavenly race had just returned, they were wreaking havoc everywhere and attacking the world. In addition to plundering resources, to a large extent, they were also destroying the deployment of the allied forces of the various races, so that they couldn't gather together. And this made their quasi-emperors even more scattered, so it was impossible for them to find trouble with the Hidden Valley. Even if there wasn't there still Yi Shiwen? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Yi Shiwen nodded and didn't say anything more. He entered the state of closed-door training. Although he wasn't around, the Hidden King alone was enough to solve those problems. It wouldn't be a problem for him to develop the Hidden Alliance to a higher level. After all, although they were recruiting a king sect, it was just an ordinary king sect. They didn't want to recruit emperor inheritances and enter them. With his cultivation, it was enough to control the situation. Therefore, Yi Shiwen was very relieved. Now, he was even more anxious to swallow this Emperor Lord's spirit. After entering the place of closed-door training in the Hidden Valley, Yi Shiwen immediately began his closed-door training. He didn't choose to return to the Demon King's treasure house. He had enough Emperor Source on hand, so there was no need to return. Time passed in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. In the depths of the place of closed-door training, Yi Shiwen closed his eyes. His whole body was emitting golden light, like a Buddha walking in the world. Around him, countless laws appeared and even surpassed the scope of the laws that divine kings possessed. And in front of him, the Emperor Lord's spirit incarnation had become very thin, as if it could disappear at any time. In Yi Shiwen's body, magic power was beating his body like a tide, and there was a thunderous sound. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen opened his eyes. The fierce look in his eyes turned into a sea of lightning that filled the sky and spread in all directions. In this mystic realm, all of his actions were kept secret. All of his martial arts were being deduced. After 100 years, his magic power had finally climbed to an extreme. No one could see the situation inside his body. Yi Shiwen opened his mouth and suddenly formed a huge suction force. The last bit of energy of the Sovereign Lord's primordial spirit incarnation also turned into a torrent and poured into Yi Shiwen's body, turning into a frenzy of energy and fusing into his body. And around his body, all kinds of laws were activated. At this moment, they were all active. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled everywhere. Thunder and fire intersected, as if a world was forming and being born. It looked extremely terrifying. After a long time, these strange phenomena finally calmed down. Yi Shiwen slowly opened his eyes. There was a flash of joy in his eyes. Finally, I reached the peak of the Divine King realm. In these 100 years, he actually directly rushed to the peak of the titled King realm. He really touched the peak of this realm, and it was impossible for him to go any higher. If he went any higher, it would be the quasi-emperor realm. It was just like ordinary people who cultivated to the level of the 10 great divine kings. His current realm had already reached that level, but his strength had long been extraordinary. Chapter 2807. Many experts who were thought to have fallen or had disappeared for many years without any news came out one after another. They joined forces in the face of the righteous cause of fighting against the heavenly race. It could be said that they were on the same level as the heavenly race. Under the invasion of the heavenly race, many experts who had been cultivating in seclusion in various places came out one after another. For a time, there were as many experts and fierce generals as there were clouds in the sky. After a few indulgences, the heavenly race was no longer something that they could deal with. However, not a single Emperor Lord responded to their call this time. This result made everyone feel afraid and suffocated. For a time, everyone came in the direction of the Hidden Valley. Whether they were curious about Yi Shiwen or dissatisfied with him, they all came. After Yi Shiwen informed the Hidden King informed him about the development of the Hidden Alliance over the years. It had already far exceeded Yi Shiwen's imagination. As long as he had this devil character in his hand, all of his devil race martial arts would advance by leaps and bounds. This was an ancient character that was close to the great way of heaven and earth. The power it possessed made everyone look at it in a new light. Although they had all been subdued by the Hidden King was not the leader of the Hidden Alliance. At best, he was a deputy leader. The real leader was someone else. Of course, this news was only spread among the higher-ups of the Allied forces. Otherwise, it would be a huge blow to the morale of the Allied forces. This was because even if they were to reluctantly join the alliance, it would leave behind a huge problem that might erupt in the future. Moreover, if they did so, the Hidden Valley would likely become the target of public criticism and everyone's enemy. In that case, if the Hidden Valley wanted to continue to develop further in the future, all the forces would be wary of the Hidden Valley. Now, there were more than 100 divine kings in the entire Hidden Valley. It could be said that they had reached the peak all of a sudden. Although they were still not comparable to those Emperor Lords' inheritances, their strength was not that far off from the Hidden Valley and those Emperor Lords' inheritances at the beginning. But what was terrifying was that not a single power had ever received a response. This was the most terrifying part. Since ancient times, there had been supreme experts who had wreaked havoc in the world, and all of them had been suppressed by imperial monarchs. Many of them had been the inheritances of imperial monarchs who had summoned back their ancestors. However, Yi Shiwen discovered that even the princes and princesses didn't have many emperor source. Only the crown princes had a bit more emperor source. However, they only had a few tens of thousands of emperor source. This was already the wealth of the crown princes. However, it was far from enough for Yi Shiwen. No one knew if there were any Emperor Lords left in the Tian clan. Just the Emperor and I, who might become an emperor, was a huge problem. Unfortunately, none of the major forces had the time to kill him. All of this was naturally due to the Hidden King and the others' continuous efforts to rope in those forces to join the Hidden Alliance. According to Yi Shiwen's original plan, he wouldn't choose to subdue others and recruit them into the Hidden Alliance. Even so, everyone believed that there should still be many experts hidden in the major forces. Those were the hidden trump cards of the major forces. They wouldn't show up easily. Even so, the strength of the Allied forces had greatly increased. It instantly made up for the losses caused by the previous losses. More than 30 king-ranked sects had joined the Hidden Alliance. It was much better than Yi Shiwen's initial expectations. Everyone knew that the Hidden Valley was the core of the Hidden Alliance. If they weren't forced into a corner, who would join the Hidden Alliance so easily? Under the powerful offensive of the Tian clan, there were indeed many powers that they had originally set up that completely surfaced, defecting one after another. There were even many kings sects that were originally the backbone of the Allied forces that had defected, bringing many experts with them. However, most importantly, this was all thanks to the celestial race's hard work. Without them constantly destroying the forces of the various regal sects and forcing them into a dead end, they would not have been able to join the secret alliance so easily. This was also because they had seized some emperor origins from the princes and princesses. They might not be very convinced by Yi Shiwen, but they didn't dare to disobey the Hidden King's orders. This was because the Hidden King had naturally shown them his methods when he subdued them. Although it was still very eye-catching now, it was much better than becoming the public enemy. It was like a big hand was strangling them. It was really a terrifying thing for them to not have an Emperor Lord to oversee them. No one could escape by luck. They could only fight the Tian clan to the death unless they wanted to be their slave. The Allied forces' headquarters, which was originally organized for this matter, quickly operated. In the beginning, it was only to deal with the Emperor opportunity. Now, it was facing the full-scale invasion of the Tian clan. The Allied forces' headquarters had regained its former prosperity. At this time, they only remembered that although the Hidden Alliance had been established for 100 years, they had never held a meeting. This itself was unreasonable. Now they understood that they were waiting for Yi Shiwen to come out of seclusion. Given his current strength, even an ordinary middle-stage quasi-emperor expert would not be a match for him. In the past 100 years, he had absorbed the primordial spirit incarnation left behind by the Qin Emperor, and his strength had increased by more than a little. In the past 100 years, the Allied forces had already broken out several times with the Tian clan. Especially after the Tian clan invaded the heavens, the major forces finally reacted in the face of the bloody fact. Everyone didn't react when they found out who the leader of the Hidden Alliance was. It was actually Yi Shiwen. They hadn't even taken a glance at him in the past. He was a junior of the younger generation. For a moment there was a lot of discussion. In an instant, the number of experts on all sides had increased. Just the number of god kings had increased by a lot. In the past countless years, the Allied forces had also cultivated many experts. It was just that many experts did not usually show up. If it had not reached this stage, they probably would not have shown up. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties. Countless gods had fallen. Many gods who were said to be indestructible had died tragically. This made people understand how terrifying it was. The overall situation was definitely not good for the Allied forces. As more and more experts from the Tian clan came out of the sealed land, the Allied forces of the Tian clan became stronger. Although they had suffered heavy losses, they were still increasing and replenishing their forces. Their overall strength did not decrease but increased. Apart from raising his strength to the peak stage of the king-ranked realm in one go, he had also completely refined the demon character. Although this was an ancient character that was naturally formed in heaven and earth and could not be completely refined by humans, Yi Shiwen could now unleash its true power. As for the ridiculous rumors that Yi Shiwen had defeated a quasi-emperor, they naturally did not believe them. The Hidden Valley's Valley Master coming out of seclusion was naturally a big deal. Everyone in the Hidden Valley treated this as a big deal. Of course, at the same time, they were convinced by the Hidden King's formidable strength. In this chaotic world, possessing formidable strength was the only way to survive. No one could overlook a powerful expert who was at the level of one of the 10 great king tiers. The news that the Hidden Alliance's leader was about to come out of seclusion spread throughout the Hidden Valley and quickly spread to all the major forces in the Hidden Alliance. Because of the original agreement, they were now considered subordinates of the Hidden Alliance. Naturally, they had to listen to the Hidden Alliance's summons. Otherwise, the entire Hidden Alliance would become their enemy. Many people who were born after the Second Heavenly Resistance War finally felt for the first time how cruel the war with the Tian clan was. Once the DNI attained the Tao, the Alliance army's seemingly evenly matched situation would instantly collapse. There would be no other possibility. With this demon word in hand, his 6 paths of reincarnation fist had not only been cultivated to the great completion realm, but its power had also increased significantly. There were mountains of corpses and seas of blood everywhere. Compared to this war that had affected the entire heavens, all the previous battles between the various races and sects could not be compared. After breaking through to the peak of the King realm, Yi Shiwen did not choose to continue seclusion. This was a chaotic world, and it was not suitable for him to stay in seclusion for a long time. Moreover, his Dharch source had already been depleted, and it was not suitable for him to continue seclusion. Naturally, he had to come out of seclusion. After replenishing their strength, the Allied forces began to defend and counterattack. They attacked repeatedly and continuously, and several battles broke out with the Tian clan's army. With the Hidden King's deterrence, they naturally did not have the guts to return. More importantly, they had long heard about the Hidden Alliance Master, and were very interested in him. Now, not only had he become a divine king, but he had also become their immediate superior. From their point of view, this was just a method that the Hidden King had used to promote Yi Shiwen. This was to build momentum for his successor. The entire situation was not optimistic. However, the most terrifying thing was not that the Tian clan's strength was getting stronger and stronger. Instead, it was the various Emperor Lords' inheritances. Apart from those who had already been confirmed to have fallen, such as the ancestral dragon, the remaining Emperor Lords' inheritances were all trying to summon back the supreme existence that had once founded their sections. However, the only thing that had consumed a lot of energy was the Dharch source. More than half of it had been depleted by Yi Shiwen. If he wanted to use the time robe, he could only use it once at most. After that, he would have to return to the Devil Monarch's treasure house. Of course, no one else had an artifact like the time robe that could be activated at any time. Before they could come to a conclusion, an even bigger piece of news came. The Hidden Alliance had issued an alliance order to convene an alliance meeting. Chapter 2808. No matter what they thought, they had to go to the Secret Alliance when they were summoned by the Secret Alliance. Moreover, many people knew very well that the situation in the multiverse had become extremely bad. No matter what, the Secret Alliance should come up with a plan. Especially in the past few years, the Secret Alliance had been fighting everywhere and expanding its territory. It was impossible not to attract the attention of other forces. If it was in a peaceful era, it would be impossible to rise like this. However, it was different now. Not to mention, the heavenly race was the biggest enemy of the various races. None of the major forces could spare any manpower to deal with the Secret Alliance's battles in the city or the east and west. However, in the eyes of the various forces, although the Secret Alliance was worth being vigilant about, It was not to the point where they would be shocked. This alliance of many regal sects was unreliable in the first place. Although not everyone harbored ulterior motives, it was inevitable that they would harbor dissenting thoughts. After all, it was all temporary and even a little forced. They had joined the secret alliance because of the strong pressure from the heavenly race. Although there had been such a successful example, it was the establishment of the martial sect. When the martial sect had first been established, the situation might not have been any better. In fact, it was even worse. This was because when the martial sect was first established, the Qin emperor almost single-handedly fought for the world. The secret alliance had the core of the hidden valley, so the conditions were much better. However, the martial sect was only able to become a martial sect because the Qin emperor swept through the world and defeated strong enemies. How could the hidden valley be compared to the Qin emperor? Therefore, the crowd did not really care. Fortunately, with the establishment of the secret alliance, the sects and worlds of the various forces had gradually moved to the vicinity of the hidden valley. They did not need others to ask them to move to the vicinity of the hidden valley. This was also to support each other and to be able to gather a strong force in a short period of time. The opponent they had to contend against was naturally the invincible heavenly race. They were different from the inheritances of the emperor. Those inheritances had unimaginable strength and powerful trump cards that they had not used. Naturally, they were as stable as Mount Tai. Compared to them, they did not have such confidence. Compared to the heavenly race, they were too insignificant. Only by gathering together could they barely resist. And the day of the secret alliance had finally arrived. Everyone in the hidden valley was welcoming the arrival of this day. The emissaries of the various powers gathered together. From time to time, powerful gods could be seen streaking across the horizon in the form of streams of light. The direction they were heading towards was a huge floating continent. The entire continent was pulled over by someone with great magic power, forming an incomparably huge square. The square was paved with countless white jades, and it was exceptionally beautiful. Clouds lingered around it, making it seem like a paradise in the mortal world. In the surroundings of this continent, there were many rugged immortal mountains. Silver-white waterfalls hung upside down in the sky, flowing out from the depths of time and space, flowing towards an unknown world. The rainbow acted as a bridge that stretched across the sky. Powerful figures constantly passed through the rainbow bridge to enter the continent. Ever since this venue was built, it had not been used many times. This was because an entire continent would not be used as a venue for an ordinary event. But this time it was different. All the major forces were present, and there was no lack of large races among them. Among those who joined the secret alliance, apart from the various regal sects, there were quite a number of unaffiliated people who joined as well. For a time, all kinds of rare birds, beasts, and powerful creatures that only existed in legends appeared on the Rainbow Bridge. Many disciples of the Hidden Valley, who were in charge of receiving them, were secretly amazed. It was only now that they could finally feel the power of the secret alliance. Although many experts of the Hidden Valley had been injured in the battle against the heavenly race in the past 100 years, more and more powerful figures had joined. This had greatly improved the strength of the entire Hidden Valley, and even the secret alliance. And now, their leader was about to come out of closed-door training. The entire Hidden Valley was actually very curious about Yi Shiwen. In particular, many of the new disciples were very curious about Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's name could only be said to be in a legendary state. Among them, Yi Shiwen had almost risen like a comet. He had rushed to the position of a high-level member of the Hidden Valley in one go before they had the chance to meet. And now, he had even become the alliance master of the entire secret alliance. Naturally, they were very curious about such a legendary figure. However, they did not dare to get too close. Almost everyone present was either a god king or a divine master. There were more than 100 god kings alone, and they were all present. As for the number of divine masters present, it was several times that. For a moment, the entire place was bustling with activity. Divine wills were flying everywhere, and many god kings were using this opportunity to communicate. In particular, many divine kings' topics were inseparable from Yi Shiwen. Is Yi Shiwen really as powerful as the legends say? I don't believe it. Even if he had started cultivating in his mother's womb, it has only been a few years. How is it possible? I also feel that it is a little unreal. It is very likely that those people in the Hidden Valley are bragging to boost his reputation. No matter how powerful Yi Shiwen is, there should be a limit. Everyone says that he can blow up a quasi-emperor. How is that possible? To these divine kings, a quasi-emperor was a legendary existence that they could not even look up to. How could they dare to believe that a junior could blow up a quasi-emperor? That was simply impossible. Among those present, only the few experts of the Beichen clan remained silent, especially Beichen Yuan. He had seen Yi Shiwen cross the void and kill a divine king with his own eyes. He still remembered that terrifying power even now. He was not sure whether Yi Shiwen could blow up a quasi-emperor, but he understood one thing. Even if Yi Shiwen could not reach the legendary level, he was still terrifyingly powerful. At the very least, he was in existence at the level of the 10 great divine kings. That was someone that they needed to look up to. To ants, a giant was already very tall. Did it matter whether this giant was 50 meters or 100 meters? The important thing was that this giant could crush them to death at any time. Hence, they did not participate in their discussion. On one hand, they were disdainful. On the other hand, they were a little worried. It would be bad if Yi Shiwen found out. Yi Shiwen had forced them to join the secret alliance back then. However, they were feeling much better now that the secret alliance was expanding. Moreover, they were the first force to join the secret alliance. So, they had always been taken care of by the secret alliance. It didn't matter whether it was the treatment of a senior member or buying a horse's bones with 1,000 gold coins. They had received tangible benefits. Therefore, they were naturally unwilling to say anything. Beichen Yuan looked at these divine kings. Although it was not convenient for him to say much, he still felt somewhat disdainful. What was there to discuss about these people? No matter what, they would have suffered heavy losses if it were not for the secret alliance's help. This was also the truth. Since that was the case, it did not matter who the leader of the secret alliance was. Not long after the various divine kings arrived, the divine kings of the secret alliance also appeared. Apart from the Flame Overlord, who was in charge of communication in the Alliance Army headquarters, all the other divine kings had arrived. The leader has arrived. For a moment, the entire venue quietened down. Everyone looked at the Rainbow Bridge and saw a figure slowly walking over. It seemed slow, but it was actually very fast. In just an instant, he had already flown into the venue and sat on the leader's throne. Everyone was secretly shocked. Even the divine kings were no exception. They all realized that their divine senses could not lock onto the other party's body at all. It seemed like he was right in front of them, but in reality, he was very far away. It was as if he was separated by an unknown amount of space. They could not see where he was at all. Moreover, he was so fast that he did not give them any time to react before he had already appeared on the throne. It seemed as if he was walking over slowly, but in the next second, he had already appeared on the throne. It felt as if he had walked over step by step in front of everyone's eyes. Images of him walking over appeared in everyone's mind, and his speed was just too fast. Everyone was shocked. Although they could not see clearly, their evaluation of Yi Shiwen had increased significantly. At this moment, the Hidden King could clearly sense that Yi Shiwen's aura was even sharper. It was like a boundless ocean, making people feel that it was boundless and powerful. Before this, Yi Shiwen gave people the feeling that he was just an ordinary person. The Hidden King guessed that it was probably because he had just come out of closed-door training and had not fully mastered it. However, this was also good. This was exactly what was needed to subdue those arrogant and domineering divine kings. Yi Shiwen sat on the throne. He could feel that everyone's eyes had turned towards him. They were all focused on him. This was their alliance master? Everyone had this question in their minds. Although Yi Shiwen was already famous, not many people had seen him in person. Greetings, leader. Under the hidden king's lead, everyone bowed in unison. Everyone, rise. Yi Shiwen propped them up, and everyone immediately felt an unimaginable force lifting them up, making them unable to continue bowing. Although not many of them were sincere, this also showed the tyrannical strength of this new leader. It was enough to raise people's eyebrows. He was definitely not the successor that the hidden king had pushed out. Didn't they see that the hidden king had also bowed down? He did not seem reluctant at all. No matter how they looked at it, this didn't seem like the way a successor would treat a junior. On the contrary, he was truly treating Yi Shiwen as the leader. Yi Shiwen's gaze swept across the crowd and he said, I am indebted to everyone's favor. As a junior, I am able to ascend to the position of the leader. I will not say anything unnecessary. I will definitely lead the Hidden Valley to develop and take advantage of the situation. Everyone, please wait and see how far I can go in the future. Chapter 2809. He wasn't a particularly strong person. However, he naturally understood that he couldn't show the slightest bit of weakness at this point in time. No one spoke. Suddenly, a harsh voice was heard, Yi Shiwen, you're just a junior who has cultivated for less than 10,000 years. What makes you think you can be the leader? Everyone was in an uproar. Although this was what many people were thinking, he must be tired of living to have the guts to shout it out in this situation. Did he really want to die? Even if Yi Shiwen wasn't as terrifying as the rumors said, the Hidden King's strength was recognized by everyone. Otherwise, everyone wouldn't have submitted to the Hidden Valley so easily and joined the Hidden Alliance. When everyone looked over, they saw that it was a huge ferocious beast. It was an evil dragon with 3 heads and 6 arms. Its entire body was golden, and it looked resplendent. It was like a heavenly dragon that protected the Buddha. Its body exuded an extremely tyrannical aura. Yi Shiwen wasn't annoyed. He just said indifferently, You said that I'm not qualified. Do you think you're qualified? Although I'm not qualified, is there anyone in the Hidden Alliance who is stronger than the Hidden King in terms of martial arts and experience? I recommend the Hidden King to be the leader of the Hidden Alliance. At this time, since they had already spoken, this evil dragon naturally didn't care about Yi Shiwen. In other words, he didn't care about Yi Shiwen at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come out to cause trouble. Everyone's eyes were focused on the two of them. They wanted to see what Yi Shiwen would do in the face of such a face-slapping situation. In particular, this evil dragon had spoken out the thoughts of many people. They would naturally have nothing to say if the Hidden King had assumed the role of the Alliance Chief. However, it would be completely different if this person was Yi Shiwen. In fact, they wouldn't be willing to admit that he was the Hidden King. Yi Shiwen smiled slightly. The Hidden King beside him had a gloomy expression. This person naturally couldn't have been arranged by him. Others might not know, but how could he not know Yi Shiwen's strength? How could he have such thoughts? He was very clear that although he was the one doing all the work for the past 100 years, and Yi Shiwen seemed to be just sitting back and enjoying the fruits of others' labor, he was able to subdue everyone because of his tyrannical strength. His tyrannical strength didn't come from anywhere else, but from Yi Shiwen. This was enough for Yi Shiwen to sit in the position of the Alliance Chief. Especially in such a chaotic world. Everyone would have a backbone in their hearts if there was such a powerful expert to oversee the situation. He knew that he didn't have such strength. So, he didn't want to compete with Yi Shiwen. This person's intentions are vicious. Junior brother, he's obviously trying to drive a wedge between the two of us. the Hidden King said. Of course, he did so through the secret voice-sending technique and did not say it directly to the crowd. Brother, don't worry, it's just a small trick, not worth mentioning. Yi Shiwen didn't take it seriously. This trick might have been very useful in other forces. However, this trick was useless against the Hidden Alliance. That was because the Hidden King had given up the position of the Valley Master of the Hidden Valley on his own accord. He hadn't been forced by Yi Shiwen. Instead, he had done it out of strategic considerations. The three-headed and six-armed evil dragon looked at everyone after he finished speaking. He hoped that everyone would agree with him. However, everyone was looking down at him at this time. They didn't want to blindly get involved. They were old foxes and very shrewd. They didn't want to be the first bird to provoke Yi Shiwen's authority. The Hidden King wouldn't let them off even if Yi Shiwen didn't care about it. The so-called "the gun will shoot the bird that pokes its head out" was nothing more than this. They admitted that they didn't have the strength to withstand the Hidden King's anger and revenge. Moreover, the first bird that had poked its head out would weigh Yi Shiwen's strength. They didn't need to do anything themselves. The evil dragon couldn't help but feel a little depressed when he saw that no one had fallen for his trick. However, he seemed to have anticipated this situation. So, he didn't take it to heart. You see, no one has any intention of agreeing with you. What do you have to say? Yi Shiwen seemed to be exceptionally patient today as he asked indifferently. That's only because everyone was forced by the Secret Alliance's prestige and didn't say anything. I, on the other hand, believe that since the Secret Alliance is going to be established and the Secret Alliance is going to develop, we'll need a good leader. This way, we'll be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. I believe that everyone here understands this as well. I won't say anything if the Hidden King becomes the Alliance leader. However, I won't accept it if you become the Alliance leader. What virtue or ability do you have to become the Alliance leader of the Hidden Alliance? I think that I'd be better than you if I were in your shoes. You want to come? Yi Shiwen sneered. Alright, I'll stand right here. As long as you can make me move a single step, I'll consider it my loss. I'll give you the position of the Alliance leader today. Everyone was in an uproar. They hadn't expected Yi Shiwen to say such words. Many people knew the background of this evil dragon. He was definitely not an ordinary person. If the Hidden King hadn't personally made a move, no one would have been able to subdue him. He didn't belong to any sect or clan. Normally, he was a loose cultivator. Recently, he had been forced by the heavenly race to join the Hidden Alliance. However, although he was a loose cultivator, his strength was extraordinary. Does Yi Shiwen intend to fight him? That's unwise. Even if he's very strong, it might be possible to fight him head-on. However, he's being too careless to make this guy fight and not be able to move. That's right. He's indeed young and full of vigor. He hasn't experienced any hardships. He's still too inexperienced. The scene was quiet. However, everyone's divine senses were intertwined in mid-air. They were communicating silently. Only the people from the Bachin family were silent. They were all very clear about Yi Shiwen's strength. He was able to kill a divine king across domains. They had never heard of such a method. Dealing with a trifling evil dragon was nothing to him. Alright, that's what you said. There was a hint of joy in the evil dragon's eyes. It seemed that his plan had succeeded. On the surface, he didn't seem to have any brains. He was even more ferocious. However, in reality, he was a cunning old fox. A man's words are worth their weight in gold. As long as your attack can force me to move from this seat will be yours today. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. His eyes were deep and emotionless. It was as if this matter couldn't even affect his emotions. Good. Straightforward. Everyone can bear witness to this. You can't deny it. I'm coming. The evil dragon immediately roared and soared into the sky. In an instant, a huge vicious dragon appeared in front of everyone. It expanded with the wind and instantly grew to a length of over 1,000 miles. It pulled out its body that was hidden in the layers of the void. Although it spoke arrogantly, it didn't underestimate Yi Shiwen. Obviously, it regarded Yi Shiwen as a formidable opponent. In its eyes, it was nothing. Perhaps it might not be able to suppress Yi Shiwen, but it was not difficult to force him to move away from his seat. Roar! This evil dragon roared towards the sky. There was a bit of the bloodline of the dragon race in his body. It was unknown where he cultivated and obtained the Tao, allowing him to cultivate to the level of a god king. It was simply unimaginable. Even among the pure-blooded dragons, there were very few who could cultivate to the divine king level. It was as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. However, this evil dragon with mixed blood could cultivate to this level. Boundless dragon power was released. The sky was filled with golden light. In the void, it was like the only sun in the world, covering all the light in the world. Dragons roar to the world. The evil dragon roared. Everyone saw countless principles being mobilized amidst the endless golden light. A long dragon was constructed at an astonishing speed. It roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was stunned. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. His eyes were filled with killing intent. This evil dragon formed by the laws had dense scales. It was lifelike, as if the real Dragon King had been reborn. Although this evil dragon was arrogant, it was indeed capable. Many divine kings compared in their hearts. Even they might not be able to launch such an attack. However, these thoughts only flashed by. In just an instant, everyone saw the long dragon pounce in front of Yi Shiwen. Humph! Yi Shiwen just snorted coldly. Rays of golden light appeared on his body. The long dragon directly collided with it. Boom! There was a loud sound. What surprised everyone was that when the two sides collided, there was not the slightest wave of energy sweeping out. The long dragon seemed to have entered a different space. Its whole body was submerged in Yi Shiwen's golden light. However, those divine kings could clearly see that it was not submerged in the golden light. It was clearly being ground away bit by bit. Therefore, from afar, it looked like the long dragon had submerged in the golden light and submerged into Yi Shiwen's body. In fact, this was not the case at all. Humph, it's not over yet. 100 dragons contend for hegemony. The voice of that evil dragon resounded above Yi Shiwen's head. He saw that this evil dragon had faintly transformed into an ugly man. Then, he ferociously punched towards Yi Shiwen. The world shook with just one punch. The matrix arrays that had been arranged in advance in the hidden valley were shattered one after another. The fist light transformed into hundreds of long dragons in an instant, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen with a whistling sound. It was majestic and mighty, just like a long river that was rushing towards the sea. Nothing could stop it, and everything that tried to stop it would be crushed into pieces. Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes. From his body, a sword light soared into the sky and rushed towards the hundreds of long dragons. Boom! An astonishing collision sound was heard. Then, everyone saw an astonishing scene. Yi Shiwen's sword light cut through the sky as if it was cutting vegetables. It beheaded all these heavenly dragons as if they were chopping melons and vegetables. Chapter 28:10. Rumble! A series of explosions sounded, and the sword light easily annihilated these dragons. A series of annihilations slashed directly in front of Yi Shiwen to the front of the vicious dragon. This dragon immediately retreated, constantly blasting out ominous lights, sweeping towards the sword light, but it was useless. The sword light that Yi Shiwen slashed out swept across the sky, invincible. However, it still seized the opportunity and teleported away. Then, it directly saw Yi Shiwen's sword light slashing into the depths of the starry sky. It was unknown how many stars it swept through, but they were all annihilated in an instant. The terrifying fluctuations of the nomological laws made the divine king's hearts skip a beat. If they were hit on the spot, even the divine kings would die. Yi Shiwen's sword light was too terrifying. It had almost exceeded their limit. If they were to face it, they would definitely die. However, they also felt very strange in their hearts. Both sides' attacks were vicious, and it didn't seem like ordinary means at all, nor did it seem like a spar. Although it was said that any little mistake in a spar between experts could cause a fatal threat, this was after all not a life-and-death fight, and they weren't enemies at all. Although they felt strange in their hearts, they were still completely convinced by the magnificence of Yi Shiwen's sword just now. The sky full of multicolored lights turned into sword light and scattered in all directions. Just one sword strike was enough to kill a divine king. This Yi Shiwen's strength seemed to be much more terrifying than the rumors. If they still regarded him as an ordinary junior, then it was very likely that they would suffer a great loss in the future. Many people became vigilant. At this moment, they were a little glad that this vicious dragon made a move. Otherwise, how would they know that Yi Shiwen, who looked a little thin, was the real terrifying killer? The vicious dragon's attack actually couldn't even shake Yi Shiwen. From the beginning to the end, it was the magical power of the nomological laws that automatically condensed and counterattacked. As for Yi Shiwen, he sat upright on his seat, not moving at all. However, his eyes were staring at this vicious dragon, and there was a rare look of seriousness on his face. Dragon roar shakes the 9 heavens. This evil dragon soared into the sky. Its huge body was like an incomparably huge mountain that rose from the ground. Every part of its body was emitting waves of golden light. Then, it began to move rapidly, causing the entire universe to tremble. A series of dragon roars could be heard. Above the secret alliance, all the divine masters and divine kings started to feel a little dazed. This kind of terrifying power seemed to have surpassed that of an ordinary peak divine king. It had directly reached the level of the 10 great divine kings. On the other hand, the hidden king's expression was extremely ugly, because he could clearly sense that the evil dragon's power had increased by several levels in a short period of time. It had directly charged to a position that was similar to his. What did this mean? It meant that this evil dragon was hiding its strength, yet he didn't react in the slightest. This in itself was a type of humiliation, an enormous humiliation. He had even created a huge hidden danger for today's meeting. He couldn't help but feel extremely depressed and regretful. Fortunately, he looked at Yi Shiwen and didn't seem to be shaken. This level of power shouldn't be a problem. It was just an ordinary expert of the 10 great divine kings level. He had even killed quasi-emperors before, so this was nothing. The evil dragon rushed down and set off a terrifying wave of air. In an instant, everyone retreated decisively. It felt as if an incomparably huge universe had directly collided with a great enemy from the universe. Even a top-notch expert wouldn't be able to withstand the full force of an expert of the 10 great divine kings level. However, in the void, the evil dragon's body was shaking rhythmically. Its entire body had integrated with the great Tao. This was an invincible attack. This was using its own body as the strongest weapon. It directly bombarded down, causing the heavens and the earth to collapse. Boundless dragon energy was emitted from its body. It was even purer than the ordinary pure-blooded dragon race. Die! That evil dragon roared continuously in the void. There were laws all over its body that turned into thousands of long dragons. They followed it, dazzling and dazzling. The light was incomparably blazing. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. In the face of such an attack, he didn't even blink. Every pore on his body was spewing out powerful sword aura. It formed a word sword above his head. This word faintly turned into a supreme emperor holding a long sword. In an instant it attacked. Walla lala! A long river of swordsmanship descended from the sky and directly rushed up to that evil dragon. Bang! There was an incomparably huge roar. Incomparably powerful forces collided. Yi Shiwen's sword aura directly hit the body of this evil dragon. And this evil dragon actually opened its big mouth and directly swallowed Yi Shiwen's sword aura, swallowing it bit by bit. The people watching from afar felt completely suffocated. They almost had a feeling that they couldn't breathe. It was completely beyond their initial expectations. This Yi Shiwen's strength was even more tyrannical than they had imagined. And this evil dragon's frequent attacks even made them feel terrified. Walla-la-la-la. The collision between the two parties formed a terrifying airwave that spread out in all directions. In an instant, it was unknown how many formations and boundaries that had been buried in the plaza were destroyed. The expressions of the many divine kings and divine masters outside the boundaries changed. If it really spread, then they would most likely be seriously injured by the aftermath of this wave. And at this moment, the hidden king directly stood up from his position. He spread his hands and endless light erupted from the gaps between his fingers. Immediately, the slightly dangerous formations and boundaries stabilized. As an expert of the 10 great divine kings level, he wasn't someone to be trifled with. He wasn't joking around. This kind of power was only enough to maintain the stability of the formations and boundaries. Seeing that the formations and boundaries had stabilized, everyone couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. They were finally a little safer. However, at this moment, the few divine kings that belonged to the Hidden Valley also attacked one after another. At the same time, they were also strengthening the boundaries. If Yi Shiwen attacked with his full strength, they couldn't guarantee that the entire continent wouldn't instantly fall apart. The power that belonged to the quasi-emperor level was not a domain that they could pry into. However, at this moment, the situation underwent a huge change. Yi Shiwen laughed coldly and said, "You want to swallow my sword light? You're really delusional." Everyone looked over and saw that the evil dragon had actually swallowed Yi Shiwen's sword light by 70 to 80%. Explode. Yi Shiwen didn't even move. He only shouted, and immediately, a series of explosive sounds came from within the evil dragon's body. Its body, which was even more tyrannical than the orthodox dragon race, exploded on the spot. It turned into a bloody mist that filled the sky and spread out in all directions on the spot. "This is, the outcome of the battle has been decided." Everyone swallowed a mouthful of saliva. At this moment, they felt that the suffocating feeling just now had disappeared. Yi Shiwen had dealt with the evil dragon with a single sword strike. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen with even more reverence in their eyes. It was simply unimaginable. One must know that the power that the evil dragon finally erupted was comparable to the 10 great divine kings. It had hidden its strength to this extent, but Yi Shiwen was still able to easily break through it. What kind of level could Yi Shiwen's true strength reach? At this moment, many divine kings who had ulterior motives suddenly calmed down. In this hidden alliance, other than the hidden king who had clearly stepped into the 10 great divine kings level, there was still Yi Shiwen who could easily kill the peak divine kings of the 10 great divine kings. No matter how they looked at it, they couldn't be considered weak. Although they still couldn't be compared with the peak emperor's inheritance, they had already formed a momentum. This evil dragon was really unlucky to actually provoke such an invincible expert. It had really kicked an iron plate. If it died, it would die in vain. No one would seek justice for it. Even if it didn't die, it would have to lose more than 1,000,000 years of cultivation to recover. However, just when everyone thought that the battle was over and Yi Shiwen had completely established his own prestige, they only heard Yi Shiwen say indifferently, "Why? Don't tell me you still want to hide in this evil dragon's body? Senior, you don't have to hide like this." When everyone heard Yi Shiwen's words, their hearts couldn't help but skip a beat. Could it be that there was still a hidden expert? Could it be that the evil dragon that was at the level of the 10 great god kings wasn't the ultimate expert? Many people thought of many possibilities at once. They were all divine masters and divine kings, and none of them were stupid. They immediately understood that someone had snuck in. The expressions of the hidden king and the others were even more unsightly. They had put up a tight defense, but someone had still managed to sneak in. Furthermore, the person had used the body of the evil dragon to enter. This was a resounding slap to the face of their security work. Ha 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 ha, you deserve to be the most outstanding genius of the human race in recent years. You actually saw through me. A burst of wild laughter came from the depths of the sky. Then, everyone only saw that the fierce dragon that had been blasted into a bloody mist by Yi Shiwen's sword explosion actually reassembled itself in the void. Then, it slowly transformed into a human figure. This human figure looked like a young man dressed in a purple robe from afar. There was a single eye on his forehead. This was an innate magical power. It was the sign of the opening of the heavenly eye. It was also a kind of extraordinary great magical power that could penetrate through the heaven and earth. Although the evil dragon hadn't transformed into a human figure before, everyone still reacted immediately. This should not be that evil dragon. It must be the intruder that Yi Shiwen had mentioned before. I'm not the most outstanding genius yet, Yi Shiwen said indifferently. He wasn't the slightest bit moved by the other party's compliment. Ha ha ha, if I say you can bear it, then you can bear it. The voice of the young man in the purple robe fell. He looked as if he couldn't be rejected at all. There aren't many people in the world who can bear my evaluation. Chapter 28:11. Everyone felt an unprecedented strong pressure from the purple-robed young man. This was a pressure of a different level of life. It was completely different from the pressure that Yi Shiwen had given them just now. This young man was actually a quasi-emperor. Everyone couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. This was the only way to explain why Yi Shiwen, who could even easily kill a master of the 10 great divine kings level, was actually a little afraid when facing this purple-robed young man. His expression was unprecedentedly dignified. It wasn't like the playful expression that he had when he killed the evil dragon previously. Previously, he knew that the evil dragon couldn't pose much threat to him. However, it was different now. Although the purple-robed young man in front of him was using the body of the evil dragon, he gave him a completely different feeling. This was a strong feeling that could really threaten him. He hadn't felt such a feeling for many years. Even the 100-eyed giant didn't give him such a threat. The identity of this purple-robed young man wasn't simple. May I know your name, senior? Yi Shiwen asked seriously. The other party was a matchless powerhouse who could produce such an amazing change even if he attached his spirit to the evil dragon's body. Even the sudden increase of the evil dragon's strength to the level of the 10 great divine kings should be caused by the purple-robed young man in front of him. I haven't mentioned my name for a long time. It doesn't matter if I tell you today. My name is Great Freedom Heaven. As soon as the purple-robed young man's voice fell, the entire square suddenly took a breath of cold air. Great Freedom Heaven? What? He is Great Freedom Heaven? It's impossible. Great Freedom Heaven? Is it the Great Freedom Heaven of the Heaven Clan? The current #1 master of the Heaven Clan, Great Freedom Heaven. Everyone reacted at once. Unlike Yi Shiwen, who had been in closed-door training for hundreds of years, they didn't know what had happened. They were very clear about how terrifying the Great Freedom Heaven was. In these 100 years, the experts of the Tian clan attacked everywhere, and the army of the Tian clan wreaked havoc everywhere. During this process, the names of countless experts of the Tian clan became widely known, and many of them were powerful figures who had created invincible reputations in the war against the heavens many years ago. The Great Carefree Heaven was one of them. Countless years ago, the Great Carefree Heaven was already famous for his tyrannical strength. He was one of the strongest experts below the Emperor of the Celestial race. It was even rumored that because of his outstanding performance on the battlefield, he had once angered the Emperor of the Celestial race's allied army to personally deal with him. In the end, the Emperor could only heavily injure him and not kill him in one fell swoop. Although he was rescued by other celestial race Empyreans, the fact that he was able to escape from an Empyrean emperor was enough to prove his tyrannical strength. In the past, he had been sealed and exiled to the endless void by the emperor of the allied army along with the other experts of the celestial race and the majority of the people of the Tian clan. Now, with the destruction of the seal, he had also come out. Although he had just come out in the past few decades, he had already fought several earth-shattering battles. He had even killed his way into the Allied army's headquarters alone, and was still able to escape unscathed. The Allied army's headquarters had used the array formation left by the Emperor of the Celestial race. Tens of thousands of array formations had been launched at the same time, but he was still able to escape unscathed. For a time, he had become famous and already had the title of the #1 person in the world. In this era where the Emperor didn't appear, he was almost invincible. Even according to the various news that had spread in the Tian clan, it was very likely that he was already at the peak of the quasi-emperor realm. He was only a little bit away from becoming an invincible emperor. It would be a huge disaster for the heavens and the 10,000 worlds if he really reached that point. For such a legendary person, even if everyone was already considered to be in the upper echelons of the Allied army, they were still in the realm of myths and legends. They could only look up to him. And now, such a person had personally come to their alliance meeting. Although it was only the incarnation of his spirit, and he was controlling an evil dragon, it was still enough to shock them. No one knew just how many more tricks the supreme beings who were close to attaining enlightenment had yet to use. It was not something they could speculate about. Even their life levels had begun to undergo a deeper level of transformation. They could feel it. Their strength was constantly increasing after they had confirmed their Tao. However, their essence was still just a name. The essence of their life hadn't changed much. However, they could feel a kind of transformation in the essence of life from the body of the great freedom heavens. Once this transformation reached the extreme, he would reach the level of the legendary emperor. The great freedom heavens? Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. At this time, the Hidden King had also transmitted all kinds of information about the great freedom heavens to him. He now knew that such a heaven-defying character had appeared in the heavenly race during his closed-door training. This person could go in and out of the Allied army headquarters alone, and escape unscathed. This was something that ordinary quasi-emperors couldn't even dream of. Ordinary quasi-emperors were powerful. However, they would be courting death if they dared to rush into the Allied army headquarters. It would be a piece of cake to destroy them by relying on the various means left behind by the Allied army headquarters. Therefore, the great freedom heavens could only besiege the Allied army headquarters. They couldn't break through it. They had to divide their forces to plunder resources and destroy other sections. The great freedom heavens was indeed qualified to be the strongest person in the world if he could do this. Of course, the premise was that the emperor wasn't present. Yi Shiwen would have to find a way out if the other party had come in his true body. He didn't need to worry about his own safety since he had the time robe. However, it was only a wisp of his spirit now. So, he didn't need to worry about anything. Yi Shiwen had sensed that the evil dragon wasn't normal from the very beginning. How could a normal person provoke him at this time? Moreover, the dragon hadn't retreated and admitted defeat after witnessing his strength. Instead, it had continued to provoke him to improve its strength. That would be stupid. Who could cultivate to this point? Who was a fool? Yi Shiwen had found something wrong with the evil dragon's body at that time. However, he had thought that an ordinary quasi-emperor had jumped in. He hadn't expected that the strongest person in the world would come. So, it's the senior who has come. I apologize for not going out to meet you. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance and said. This was a show of respect to the strongest person in the world. Any other evil dragon wouldn't even have the qualifications to let Yi Shiwen look at it. Everyone held their breath and looked at the great freedom heavens. They didn't know why he had come this time. His true body had been sitting on the front line of besieging the Allied Army headquarters all year round. He wouldn't leave. Otherwise, the army of the heavenly race wouldn't have been able to withstand the joint attack of the Allied army. There were many experts in the Allied army. So, they wouldn't be able to suppress the other party unless he personally brought up the rear. Now, he had sent his primordial spirit incarnation. This matter itself seemed very unusual. I came here on a whim. I heard that a peerless hero has appeared in your human race. He can be compared with the ancient sages. So, I came here to see if you can be compared with Fushi and the others. The great Freedom Heavens said indifferently, "Fortunately, you didn't disappoint me. You should be proud of your cultivation at such a young age. It's a pity that I didn't get to see the glory of the Emperor of Qin. I hate that we weren't born in the same generation." "Senior, you must be joking. Would you still be alive to boast here if we were born in the same generation?" Yi Shiwen sneered. The Emperor of Qin was invincible even when he was young. So, it wouldn't be a good thing if the great Freedom Heavens had been born in the same generation as him. In fact, he would have perished in the end. When the great Freedom Heavens heard this, he didn't seem to be moved at all. He just said indifferently, "If we were born in the same generation, I would have killed him. Then, I could have used that battle to successfully achieve the Tao." His words were filled with boundless confidence. Instantly, many of the divine masters and divine kings present went into an uproar. This was because they were all humans just like Yi Shiwen. The North Star family, in particular, had indignant looks on their faces. The Emperor of Qin was the only one in the human race to become an emperor. He was also the only one in the modern era to achieve the Tao and become an emperor. Everyone in the world respected him. Even if there were people who hated him to the core, they wouldn't dare to say such arrogant words. Killing the Emperor of Qin when he was young was a joke. According to historical records, the Emperor of Qin was invincible ever since he made his debut. He won every battle he fought. Especially after he became a god, he never met anyone who could rival him. In the end, he defeated all the strong enemies and became an emperor. How could this great Freedom Heavens be so arrogant? Although he was recognized as the strongest person in the world now, the Emperor of Qin had also dominated the world in the past. What right did he have to say such words? Beichen Yuan couldn't help but shout, "Great Freedom Heavens, don't talk big. If you were born in the same generation as the Emperor of Qin, you wouldn't even know how you died." "Nonsense. Is there any room for you to speak here?" Great Freedom Heavens smiled coldly and waved his sleeve. Instantly, boundless power turned into a rainbow that covered the sky and swept towards Beichen Yuan. Beichen King, who was next to him, didn't have time to help. He could only watch as Great Freedom Heavens' shocking attack rushed towards him. Puff! A very soft sound was heard, and the all-encompassing attack vanished into nothingness. Only now did everyone realize that Yi Shiwen had forced out a sword energy from his finger at the most crucial moment. He then pointed it towards Great Freedom Heaven's attack, and turned it into nothingness. Then, it disappeared from the world in an instant. Great Freedom Heavens, the Emperor of the human race, isn't someone you can compare to. If you were really that powerful, you would have become an emperor long ago. Just tell me why you're here." Yi Shiwen stared at Great Freedom Heavens and said calmly. There was a sharp look in his eyes. Chapter 28:12. Great Realm of Freedom, you can't compare with the Emperor of the human race. You would have become an emperor long ago if you were that powerful. Just tell me why you've come. Yi Shiwen didn't feel anything even though he was facing the strongest expert in the world. Moreover, both sides were enemies. Moreover, the great realm of freedom was the strongest expert of the celestial race. Even if it was just a soul avatar, it could easily attract the attention of the high-level experts of the Allied forces. Great Realm of Freedom looked at Yi Shiwen and said, I've heard that a peerless expert of the human race has appeared. Now that I see it, it's true. I've just come out and I don't have any followers yet. I'll give you a chance to become my follower. Follower? Ha 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 ha, you want me to become your follower? Yi Shiwen laughed out loud. It seemed as if he was about to burst into laughter. The celestial race is full of trash. What kind of a gift is this? Great Realm of Freedom didn't care. He just looked at Yi Shiwen indifferently. It seemed as if he was waiting for his answer. What if I don't live up to my reputation? Yi Shiwen asked again. Then just kill him. Anyway, the entire race will be wiped out. What's one more or one less? Great Realm of Freedom said indifferently. Arrogant. Many humans gritted their teeth and said this. This was related to the righteousness of the entire race. It was also related to themselves. How could they not be angry? Great Realm of Freedom, your celestial race has failed twice. You're no longer at your peak. Don't talk big before you achieve it. Otherwise, you'll slap your own face in the end. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. Great Realm of Freedom didn't care about this matter like the ordinary celestial race. Perhaps this matter was nothing in his eyes. He was the strongest person in the world. No longer at your peak? Perhaps. But you're far from being comparable to the two wars, aren't you? Great Realm of Freedom said indifferently. Yi Shiwen, give me a reply. His eyes were looking at the deep universe. However, Yi Shiwen could clearly feel that Great Realm of Freedom's soul had locked onto him. You want to kill me? Yi Shiwen reacted immediately. He immediately understood Great Realm of Freedom's intention. He didn't even try to hide. That's interesting. If you don't come here personally, I'd like to see what kind of ability you have to be so arrogant. Yi Shiwen moved as he thought of this. The devil wings on his back suddenly spread open. Then, his figure suddenly streaked across the vast sky like a meteor, and rushed towards the great freedom heaven. And if I say no? Yi Shiwen's voice reverberated in the air. Everyone was horrified. Yi Shiwen had actually attacked the world's #1 expert. Even if it was just a soul incarnation, it still had a huge deterrent effect on everyone. These god kings and god masters weren't even on the same level as him. Then die. Mahasvara's cold voice caused everyone's hearts to go numb. A battle was unavoidable. Mahasvara's eyes burst with countless symbols of the Great Path, and there were traces of the Great Path in them. The title of the #1 person in the world was indeed not false. Perhaps the rumor that he was about to achieve the Great Path was not false. In an instant, his body had already fallen into an endless space. It was a blur, making it impossible for anyone to see where exactly he was. Bang! Yi Shiwen's attack instantly arrived in front of the great freedom heaven. His strength had increased by more than just a little bit compared to before. Everyone realized that Yi Shiwen hadn't used his full strength when he had easily killed the 10 great God King level experts. In fact, he had only used a small part of his strength. When had he grown to this level? It was simply unbelievable. His attack had reached its peak at this moment. He was killing in all directions. He wanted to kill the great freedom heaven in one breath. There was a bit of anger in the eyes of the great freedom heaven. Yi Shiwen hadn't agreed, but he had actually dared to attack first. He didn't respect him at all. This was the first time he had encountered such a person. However, it was also because of this that his killing intent towards Yi Shiwen was even more boiling. He couldn't allow such a person to live if he didn't surrender. He had to kill him. An ancient character appeared on the body of the great freedom heaven. No one could see what it was, but it had fooled him. Yi Shiwen's attack had bombarded down, and was easily blocked by the great freedom heaven. The great freedom heaven had the same body, but it couldn't be compared with the evil dragon's consciousness. There must be a big secret hidden in his body. That was why his strength had improved to this level. Is your full strength only at this level? The words of the great freedom heaven revealed a mocking tone. It seemed as if he was laughing at Yi Shiwen's overconfidence. Whether it's only at this level or not, you'll know once you give it a try. Boundless fist light splashed out from Yi Shiwen's 5 fingers, and shot into the sky. It seemed like the first ray of light that had split the world apart. It shattered everything, and allowed everything to be reborn and re-enter the cycle of reincarnation. This was the way of heaven and earth. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist is indeed powerful. However, it's far from reaching its peak in your hands. The principles appeared around the great freedom heaven's body. They spread out in all directions like water ripples. They directly blocked Yi Shiwen's attack, and only left bursts of chaotic smoke. Yi Shiwen's expression also changed slightly. This was the first time he had encountered an invincible person who could block his 6 paths of reincarnation fist just by relying on the understanding of the principles around him. Even the head of the 100-eyed giant would have exploded if he hadn't blocked it. Others might not know how powerful Yi Shiwen's punch was. However, Yi Shiwen was well aware of it. The great freedom heaven's understanding of the principles had reached a shocking level. He could easily block the 6 paths of reincarnation fist with just a casual defense. Yi Shiwen, refusing my invitation was the last and worst decision you've ever made in your life. It's impossible for you to defeat me if your strength is second only to mine. The great freedom heaven said coldly, I'll make you understand that no one in this world can refuse me. Anyone who refuses me will die without a burial place. Humph, you want me to be your follower? You're not qualified. Yi Shiwen sneered. The great freedom heaven attacked at this time. The countless principles around his body started to boil. It seemed as if a real dragon was coiling around his body. It swept out in an instant, and an invisible power spread out. The terrifying power started to boil. Everyone in the distance was in a daze. They felt as if their bodies were going to collapse under the effect of the power of the principles. The great freedom heaven was known as the #1 expert in the world. It wasn't a lie. Everyone started to retreat decisively. They might have been able to sit down calmly when Yi Shiwen had fought against that evil dragon. But the battle between Yi Shiwen and freedom heaven had made them thoroughly understand one thing. The disparity between them and these 2 individuals was too great. They weren't on the same level of existence. They retreated again and again. They didn't dare to approach them. Just the aftermath of such a battle was enough to tear their bodies into pieces. Hiss, why do I feel as if a powerful emperor has been resurrected in the sky? What kind of terrifying power is this? Why does the heavenly race have such a formidable power? Is this the peak of the quasi-emperor? If the peak of the quasi-emperor is this powerful, then how terrifying would the real emperor be? How terrifying would the strength of the heavenly race be when they were at their peak? They could contend against many races in the world by themselves. Many divine kings and divine lords couldn't help but change their complexions when they saw this scene. They couldn't believe it. Fortunately, they still had Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, they would have died without a burial place. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt that the surrounding principles were getting out of his control. Originally, there was an absolute domain around his body. No one could control these principles within this absolute domain. It was also his absolute domain of safety. This was also the reason why the final battle had to be settled by martial arts. If one wanted to crush someone with the principles, then one's comprehension of the principles would have far surpassed the others. It was like a fight between 2 top-notch hackers. Their control over various programs would annihilate each other. It was much more direct than going to the front of the other party and chopping the other party to death. This situation wasn't absolute. If one party's comprehension and control of the principles far surpassed the other party, then the entire situation would be completely different. Just like the current Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen was far superior to ordinary people and was above all divine kings, and even ordinary quasi-emperors weren't his match. He was still a divine king in the end. He was just a divine king who had an extremely profound understanding of the principles. Even ordinary quasi-emperors didn't have such a profound understanding of the principles. It was also because of this that he could be said to be invincible against other quasi-emperors. However, the realm of freedom was different. He was Zhen Jiajing, someone who had already taken half a step into that realm. His comprehension of the principles was a level higher than Yi Shiwen's. He could actually use the principles to destroy the absolute domain around Yi Shiwen and directly attack Yi Shiwen's body. Yi Shiwen immediately felt the pressure. An incomparably heavy feeling came from his whole body. It seemed as if shackles had completely imprisoned his whole body. This was the effect of the neutral principle and the confinement principle. These two principles alone made Yi Shiwen feel as if he couldn't breathe. Do I have to use the robe of time now? Countless thoughts flashed through Yi Shiwen's mind. He naturally had his greatest trump card when he dared to attack. The robe of time could at least summon the sword of Avicii from the Demon King's treasury. It wouldn't be that easy to defeat him. Chapter 28:13. It would be a piece of cake for Yi Shiwen to destroy the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens with 2 Dao tools in hand. However, it was just a spirit incarnation. His main body's means were probably even more amazing. If Yi Shiwen had to use all his trump cards just to deal with the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens, then he wouldn't have any trump cards to use when facing him again. The only trump card that could be called a Dao tool was a Dao tool. Ordinary means wouldn't be of any use to him. Yi Shiwen immediately rejected this idea because it wasn't necessary. Great Freedom Heaven's cultivation of law was far superior to his own. He could suppress Yi Shiwen to this extent just by relying on the comprehension of law. This was indeed an unprecedentedly strong enemy. He wouldn't have dared to imagine such a terrifying situation in the past. However, it wasn't unsolvable. After all, it wasn't his main body. He was merely relying on the physical body of a peak divine king. It might not seem to be a problem at other times, but in reality, it was the biggest problem when facing Yi Shiwen. In terms of the comprehension of law, Yi Shiwen definitely couldn't compare with Great Freedom Heavens. However, the situation was completely different when it came to the body. More importantly, Yi Shiwen didn't care about the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens. Instead, he treated it as a kind of training and a whetstone. If he couldn't even deal with the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens, then how could he face his main body? Perhaps others were afraid of his main body. However, Yi Shiwen didn't think so. For him, Great Freedom Heavens was just a goal that he had to surpass. Perhaps it was the strongest goal in his life. However, how could he talk about achieving the Tao if he couldn't even match Great Freedom Heavens? Bang! Yi Shiwen's vital energy surged out of his body and broke the shackles of the principles. All the principles that tried to invade his body were smashed into pieces by his vital energy. Great Freedom Heaven's eyes flashed with a bit of surprise. He didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would get rid of his suppression so quickly and find a way to deal with it. Great Freedom Heaven's understanding of law was extremely profound. However, it was possible to fully display this understanding by relying on incomparable strength. His main body was naturally invincible. However, it didn't mean that this evil dragon could withstand such power. Moreover, it couldn't display such power. Therefore, to a certain extent, it seemed that he did not have much of an advantage. Mahasvara, I've read about you in the ancient records, and it seems like you're one of the strongest experts in the world. I'm curious as to how strong you have to be considered as one of the strongest experts beneath the God Monarch. I've never had a chance to do so in the past, but now I can take a good look at it. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. He regained his composure and calmness. It seemed that the previous attack hadn't affected him at all. Humph, how would you juniors who were born in a peaceful era know how powerful we are? In the chaotic era of war, I even fought against a sovereign emperor. How would you understand? The great unrestrained heavens revealed the reason why he was so confident. In his opinion, no matter how shocking and brilliant these juniors were, they were nothing more than little flowers that had been raised in a greenhouse. They would be blown away by the wind. On the other hand, he had experienced a battle with a sovereign emperor. By the time of the Second War of Resistance against the Heavens, he was already one of the few experts in the world. Being able to escape from a sovereign emperor was completely different from them. They were all little flowers that had been raised in a greenhouse, so they weren't worth mentioning in the same breath. This kind of thing had always happened to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't have the system's inheritance. However, the number of times he had narrowly escaped death, and the number of battles he had experienced was beyond their imagination. Yi Shiwen's strength had been tempered in iron and blood. He hadn't simply cultivated all the way to his current strength. Is that so? I don't think so. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly and said, "So what if I was born early? It's not something to be proud of if I haven't achieved the Tao. You're just a junior. What do you know? You haven't reached this step yet. So, you don't understand that the gap between one step and the other is so great," the great unrestrained heavens said indifferently. His expression seemed as if he was telling Yi Shiwen that Yi Shiwen wouldn't understand even if he explained it to him. To me, if you haven't crossed over, then you haven't. It doesn't matter how many excuses you find for yourself. The Qin Emperor's cultivation time wasn't even a tenth of yours, but he was still invincible. In the end, he achieved the Tao. This means that you don't have that kind of talent. Yi Shiwen said coldly, "Are you used to measuring others by age because you've been cultivating for a long time? This is the saddest thing about you. Growing older isn't an advantage. Instead, it's a burden. It will imprison your thoughts. It will make you grow old and rigid. In fact, it will make you unable to keep up with the times." The great unrestrained heavens looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. He felt that he was looking at an opponent for the first time. Yi Shiwen's words didn't move his heart too much. After all, he already had his own standards in his heart. So, he wouldn't be swayed by other people's words. However, Yi Shiwen was able to say such words even though he was looking down on him. This showed that Yi Shiwen's willpower wasn't ordinary. Yi Shiwen might grow to the same level as the great unrestrained heavens if Yi Shiwen was allowed to grow for a few more years. In fact, Yi Shiwen would become his matchless enemy. This was the first time that the great unrestrained heavens had a murderous intention after he had come out of the seal. He wanted to kill someone. He had to kill them. There was no other way. There were simply too many geniuses in this world. No one knew if a peerless genius would appear in a nameless race that no one knew about. Even their Tian clan was unable to control such a trend. It's useless even if you have a sharp tongue. It won't save you. The great unrestrained heavens finally moved at this time. His body moved slightly. Countless principles started to dance in a frenzy. However, they weren't without any pattern. They were actually responding to the principles of the Great Way. They were borrowing infinite power from the principles, and their might was overwhelming the world. The great unrestrained heavens wouldn't be able to defeat Yi Shiwen even if he were to rely on the strength of his spirit. So, he naturally had his own means and method. At this time, the great unrestrained heavens was like a shrunken version of the Emperor. It might sound ridiculous, however, his true might made everyone suffocate. He was terrifyingly powerful. It seemed as if the real Emperor had come back to life in an instant. The world's principles could feel the anger of the great unrestrained heavens. There weren't many people who could make him angry since he had reached the pinnacle. The entire continent was shaking violently. It was trembling under his aura. The will of the continent was shivering. Everyone looked at this scene from afar, and felt incomparably terrified. Boom! The great unrestrained heavens made his move. He suddenly grabbed with his big hand. Countless principles automatically attached to it, and formed a huge hand that was thousands of feet in size. It sealed all the space in the world. No one could escape. It weaved into a huge net and sealed everything. Die. The entire body of the great unrestrained heavens erupted with bursts of dazzling golden light. He spouted out a mouthful of essence energy. The huge hand became even more terrifying after receiving this mouthful of essence energy. The rays of light became even more dazzling. Yi Shiwen's entire body was under great pressure. All the bones in his body were colliding, and the sound of metal colliding could be heard. He was also resisting. Law talismans appeared around him one after another, and gushed out from his body. It was like an incomparably ancient scripture. It was like an incomparably huge divine kingdom, and it enveloped him within it. This was a confrontation of the laws. The big hand wanted to slap down, and Yi Shiwen wanted to push it back. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth. He didn't launch a further surprise attack. He was simply enduring the pressure of the principles. I can't retreat. The principles of both sides were colliding in an astonishing manner. The principles that Yi Shiwen had condensed weren't superior to the great unrestrained heavens. In fact, they almost collapsed upon contact. This showed the disparity in the comprehension of the principles of both sides. They weren't on the same level. However, some details were undergoing astonishing changes. The dazzling collision was still going on. Violent shockwaves spread out in all directions. Yi Shiwen's shattered principles condensed once again. This kind of direct collision of principles was the easiest way to destroy a person's faith. No matter how much faith one had, or how firm one's faith was, one's faith would collapse in an instant when one saw that the principles one had comprehended could not withstand a single blow from the opponent. However, Yi Shiwen didn't collapse. His willpower was already as firm as a rock. Moreover, the mysterious space was constantly deducing for him. He could absorb more of the principles every time he was defeated. It didn't matter whether it was from the defeat or from the great unrestrained heavens. This was like tearing and reforming. Yi Shiwen's worldview was subverted every moment. It turned out that the application of the principles could be so ingenious. Turned out that this was the true way to use the principles. This kind of understanding of the race against time in a life and death situation made Yi Shiwen's mind tense to the extreme. He didn't even dare to take a breather. However, Yi Shiwen was also undergoing a kind of quiet transformation while he was constantly being defeated and reforming. His cultivation had stagnated after he had just broken through to the peak of the king-ranked realm. However, his cultivation had suddenly skyrocketed. This meant that his collisions with the principles of the great unrestrained heavens were deepening. He was constantly absorbing the principles of the great unrestrained heavens for many years. At the same time, he was strengthening himself and improving his ability to comprehend the principles. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to do this. If they collapsed in an instant, they would die. If their confidence collapsed, there wouldn't be any other outcome. However, Yi Shiwen had the mysterious space. Chapter 28:14. This was a possibility for Yi Shiwen to analyze his opponents and improve himself during the battle. If it was someone else, it would be impossible, but he could do it. This kind of thing could be said to be a walk in the park for him. It wasn't the first time he had done this kind of thing in his daily life. However, this was the first time he had analyzed such a powerful opponent. He had never felt this way before. He did not dare to relax even a little. This was an excellent opportunity for him. There were so many laws in the sky that it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to understand all of them. Moreover, the application of all the laws was different. It would take a lot of time to comprehend them one by one. Now that he was analyzing Great Freedom Heaven's fighting style, It was like the key points in the textbook given to him by the teacher before the college entrance examination. This was the way to fight and the direction to comprehend. For Yi Shiwen, this would save him a lot of time and energy. Therefore, he would never let go of such an opportunity. All of this happened in just a few breaths. Great Freedom Heaven was a little surprised to find that his law attack did not manage to defeat Yi Shiwen in the first place. In the past, this would have been absolutely impossible. Let alone a God King, very few people would be able to withstand his attacks of laws, even if he were to face a quasi-emperor. Even if it was not his true body, this was definitely extraordinary. He even keenly found that Yi Shiwen's law attack contained some traces of his own attack. A terrifying thought flashed through his mind in an instant. Is he copying my method? He was shocked when he thought of this. His attack method had been copied by someone else. Moreover, it was by a small divine king. This was an incredible thing for him. This aroused his killing intent. Yi Shiwen was able to comprehend while fighting in such a battle. What a terrifying talent! He must not let Yi Shiwen continue to grow. Great Freedom Heaven would never have thought that Yi Shiwen was not copying his attack method. Instead, he was analyzing his attack method and finally transforming it into his own attack method. It seemed like the result was the same, but the process was completely different. A simple copy was knowing what it was, but not knowing why. But after analyzing it, using the same method to counterattack meant that one had already understood the principles behind it. This was even more terrifying, as one could draw inferences about other cases from one case. The speed at which one's cultivation was improving was simply too fast. As time passed, Yi Shiwen's law counterattack became sharper and sharper. He was able to hold his ground. It was not like the beginning when he was defeated. This showed that Yi Shiwen's understanding of the Great Way had increased by a whole level. In a short period of time, he had truly touched the peak of the 10 great divine kings. As long as he had enough emperor source, his martial strength could even reach the peak in a short period of time. He could even start to prepare to break through the quasi-emperor realm. This process would have taken him several hundred years if he didn't have the pressure of the Great Freedom Heaven. But now, he had completed it in just a few breaths' time. This was the amazing effect of the mysterious space. Even Yi Shiwen was startled by it. Of course, the price of all this was that the emperor source that he had stored was getting smaller and smaller. It was being consumed at an alarming speed. However, Yi Shiwen was not worried. He had the key to the Devil King's treasure house. He could enter the Devil King's treasure house at any time. His Emperor source could also be replenished. On the contrary, this was a rare opportunity. He was not willing to give up. This was an excellent opportunity. If it were any other expert at the peak of the quasi-emperor realm, they would be able to display a lot of methods when their deities had descended. They wouldn't need to use the pure law to crush Yi Shiwen. Then, Yi Shiwen wouldn't be able to absorb and comprehend like he was doing now. He even had an even crazier idea. If he could thoroughly understand the law displayed by Great Freedom Heaven, his cultivation would be able to go further in a short period of time. He would reach an unprecedented realm. Every step here could save him countless years of bitter cultivation. One must know that the current situation was getting more and more urgent. He couldn't afford to relax. He had only been in closed-door training for a mere 100 years. Unexpectedly, an invincible character like Great Freedom Heaven had appeared. This made him nervous. Everyone couldn't understand such a battle. They didn't know how intense the confrontation was. However, they understood that such a battle could endanger their lives if they weren't careful. So, they couldn't afford to give in. The shock waves of the collision between the two sides swept out. The internal formations of the hidden valley were recovering one after another. They were trying their best to resist the shockwaves. However, even so, they were still broken from time to time. This terrifying situation made everyone terrified. This was a battle between quasi-emperor level experts. Even the entire hidden valley, which had already experienced the surprise attack of a quasi-emperor, was still terrified in the face of this force. Because at that time, Yi Shiwen had blocked the 100-eyed giant outside. Most importantly, the strength of both sides paled in comparison to the current strength of both sides. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen was still constantly absorbing the comprehension of Great Freedom Heaven. He was still accelerating his cultivation. He was about to break through to the late stage of quasi-emperor level. The closer he got to that level, the easier it would be for him to fight against Great Freedom Heaven. Although the power of Great Freedom Heaven couldn't be compared to his main body, there was no difference in the comprehension of the law displayed by him. It was nothing more than being restricted by his strength. So, he couldn't display it completely. After a long time, Great Freedom Heaven finally realized this. Even if it was only for a short period of time, it was enough for him to judge the situation. It might have been possible in the beginning. However, it was impossible for him to defeat Yi Shiwen by relying on the comprehension of the law. So, he finally moved. This time, he didn't use the law as the main force. Instead, he used his body, which had been stimulated to the peak. The terrifying roar of the evil dragon came from inside his body. It was screaming miserably because Great Freedom Heaven was burning his life essence. He didn't care about his existence at all. Anyway, it wasn't his own body. It was just a useless thing that could be thrown away after being used once. However, the evil dragon could feel that his strength was becoming stronger. He had directly broken through the boundary of the king realm and rushed into the quasi-emperor realm. He might have been very happy to make a breakthrough in normal times. However, he was being guided by someone. It wasn't his own will at all. Moreover, it would leave a very shocking future trouble. If the battle went on like this for too long, his body would explode on the spot. Even his soul would be blown to pieces, and he would not even have the chance to revive. He was scared and trembling. However, Great Freedom Heaven didn't care. He wouldn't have the strength to fight against Yi Shiwen if he didn't do this. The body of this human divine king was too amazing. It was unprecedented. He had seen human emperors before. However, he had never seen a divine king who was so tyrannical. He must have some kind of supreme bloodline and physique. Soon, the roar of the evil dragon disappeared. His consciousness had been crushed by the great freedom sky. He wanted to take complete control of this body. He couldn't let the original owner of this body exist. As long as the original owner of this body existed, he wouldn't be able to take complete control of this body. He didn't care whether this body would collapse on the spot or not. After all, it was just a one-time use item. Boom! Great Freedom Heaven finally made his move. His body was majestic and majestic. He was like a huge monument. He pressed down on Yi Shiwen on the spot. This was the supreme technique that he had displayed. The big hand suddenly received the infusion of his own power, and its power instantly increased by several levels. Yi Shiwen, who was only resisting with the power of the law, almost collapsed on the spot. Whoosh! Yi Shiwen's figure disappeared instantly, and the big hand slammed down directly, smashing a huge hole in the void directly. Countless chaos poured down in torrents. This attack made everyone feel as if they had seen the true resurrection of the legendary emperor. With a raise of his hand, countless galaxies were annihilated. What kind of strength was this? What kind of horror was this? This was a fight between quasi-emperors. Yi Shiwen appeared in the distance the next moment. There was a look of pity on his face. The collapse of the law couldn't affect his confidence. It couldn't destroy his martial arts either. It was a pity. He was so close to breaking through to the late stage of quasi-emperor realm. At that time, it would have been a piece of cake for him to improve his cultivation. It was a pity that he had failed at the crucial moment. However, he immediately restrained this feeling. What he had gained earlier had saved him hundreds of years of hard work. Wasn't that enough? You're quite capable to copy my attack. You're worthy of being the most outstanding genius of the human race. However, it's useless. Today is the day you die." Great Freedom Heaven's voice was cold and ruthless. A sinister look finally appeared on his face. He was finally angry because he couldn't do anything to Yi Shiwen. A big hand swept over without any warning, and went straight towards Yi Shiwen to grab him. This speed was so fast that it seemed as if it had teleported. Crash! The big hand swept over Yi Shiwen's body. He turned into a ball of light on the spot and flew towards the depths of the universe. "This is not the place to fight. Come with me if you're capable." Chapter 28:15. Humph! Great Freedom Sky didn't care. He immediately rushed out. In his opinion, the people of the Hidden Valley weren't a threat at all. As long as he could get rid of Yi Shiwen, everything would be as easy as pie. Although it was only a part of his spirit avatar that had descended, it was impossible for him to do such a thing frequently. Only a little bit of his spirit avatar was not Yi Shiwen's opponent at all. It would be wiped out by Yi Shiwen in minutes. Even if he had this body, he still wouldn't be a match for Yi Shiwen. He was very clear about this. Yi Shiwen flew into the depths of the cosmic void. Great Freedom Sky quickly followed him. Both sides confronted each other in the universe. His majestic figure stood in the sky like a real emperor looking down on all the ancient heavens. Yi Shiwen looked at the Great Freedom Heaven and slightly sighed. He had been unceasingly analyzing the Great Freedom Heaven's comprehension of the principles a while ago. And he had taken advantage of it. However, the Great Freedom Heaven had reacted now. However, it didn't matter. These understandings were enough for him to digest for a while. He would advance further after this battle. Buzz! Great Freedom Sky's imposing aura poured out like a waterfall. It swept towards Yi Shiwen in an overwhelming manner. Yi Shiwen didn't show any weakness this time. Since he couldn't take any advantage, he wouldn't show any weakness. His imposing aura poured out like a surging sea and collided with Great Freedom Sky. Boom! Great Freedom Sky moved like a violent star. He collided and destroyed the universe. Yi Shiwen didn't want to show any weakness either. He rushed forward on the spot. Bang! The terrible battle had just begun. Great Freedom Sky's offensive was very smooth. It swept across the battlefield. It was unknown how many strong enemies he could crush. Yi Shiwen was the opposite. He didn't hesitate at all. Each of his moves was aimed at Great Freedom Sky's vital points. Both sides exchanged thousands of moves in an instant. It was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Humph! Admit defeat. You have no chance of winning against me. I'd like to see how long your vitality can last. Yi Shiwen sneered. He knew that Great Freedom Sky had no chance of winning since he relied on burning his vitality to enhance his strength. It's enough to kill you. Freedom Heaven looked at Yi Shiwen with an incomparably cold expression. His eyes were like the depths of the universe, without the slightest bit of warmth. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen's berserk strength had completely broken out after he had completely let go of his hands and feet. Everyone had thought that the Great Freedom Heavens had gained the upper hand. However, it had been forced to retreat under Yi Shiwen's offensive. Although his comprehension of the laws was completely above Yi Shiwen's, it wasn't his main body after all. When Yi Shiwen decided to abandon the competition of laws and go all out, his advantage became extremely ridiculous. Yi Shiwen was not an ordinary god king. His methods were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. Die! Yi Shiwen took a step forward and chased after the Freedom Sky after he had sent it flying. He then blasted a punch, and a fist light suddenly traversed the vast sky. It pierced through the sun and the moon, and shattered countless stars. Behind him, the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel was constantly rotating, and the formidable power of the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel was constantly sweeping out. The fist light interweaved into a big net, and wrapped everything together. The Freedom Sky couldn't escape. Bang! Freedom Sky couldn't help but groan as he was hit by Yi Shiwen's attack. He spouted a mouthful of blood, and his dragon energy was dense. 6 paths of reincarnation fist, Freedom Sky said coldly. He wasn't a benevolent person. He was an invincible person who had experienced the war against the heavens. He might have been exiled in the end, but that wasn't something that he could decide. That's right. It's the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Let me use this fist technique to send you into reincarnation. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. The principles surrounding the great freedom heaven were forced away by his fist light. This martial technique is good, but it's still not a reason for you to be so arrogant. A gap appeared around Freedom Sky's body. An incomparably terrifying power wreaked havoc around him, and his clothes fluttered in the wind. At the same time, his body exuded an incomparably terrifying fluctuation. The eye on his forehead suddenly opened. However, it was not an eyeball, but a talisman. Freedom Talisman. Yi Shiwen recognized the origin of this talisman. It was very simple. This was one of the techniques that had made Freedom Sky famous in the past. The Great Unrestrained Talisman was a powerful essence of the martial path that the Great Unrestrained Heaven had obtained from somewhere. He had extracted it from that essence and refined it into the Great Unrestrained Talisman. It was a talisman that was invincible and had shaken the heavens in the past. And now, in the short span of a few decades since his return, he had made this technique famous once again, causing many people to recall this powerful technique from the depths of their memories. His imposing aura had increased by a notch under the support of the Freedom Talisman. He was determined to kill Yi Shiwen. So, you used the Freedom Talisman. I was wondering how a small spirit incarnation could have such amazing fighting power. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and said. He had always wondered how a mere incarnation of Great Freedom's soul could wield the body of the evil dragon to such an extent. If a mere incarnation of Great Freedom's soul was so powerful, then he alone would be able to flatten the entire headquarters of the Allied army. Obviously, it was impossible for him to do so. Yi Shiwen, you've forced me to use the Freedom Talisman. You're very powerful. But it ends here. Today will be the day of your death. Freedom Sky said coldly. Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. They were very clear about the prestige of the Freedom Talisman. Even the supreme existence of the Allied forces' headquarters had suffered a great loss because of it. This technique was almost invincible. Freedom Sky's incarnation was enough to put Yi Shiwen to death even if he hadn't arrived. It's the legendary Freedom Talisman that even the Emperor cares about. I didn't expect that he would use such a technique to deal with Yi Shiwen. No one can stop this Freedom Talisman once it's used. The Freedom Talisman erupted with astonishing rays of light. It absorbed the essence of the world and projected it onto Freedom Sky's body. He was the sole overlord of the world at this moment. The power of Freedom Sky's body also skyrocketed. He didn't look like a sage at all. Whoosh! Freedom Sky attacked in an instant. His hands tore the blue dome of heaven. A dreadful power spread out, and it seemed as if it would tear Yi Shiwen's body into 2 halves. The Great Boundless Talisman can transform into my strength. The Great Boundless Talisman must contain countless comprehensions of yours. So, it can make me rise to the same level as you in one go. Yi Shiwen's eyes burst out with a bright light. He could stand shoulder to shoulder with Freedom Sky in terms of realm level if he could completely swallow and refine the Freedom Talisman. After all, Freedom Sky had comprehended all the principles of Freedom Sky's body. So, it naturally had such an effect. It was impossible to achieve this under normal circumstances. Yi Shiwen couldn't succeed with Freedom Sky's incarnation present. So, this was the best opportunity. Emperor Source, come! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. A huge portal appeared behind him, and endless demon energy rushed out of it. Countless Emperor Source poured into Yi Shiwen's body under his command, and replenished his consumption. He had opened the door of the Devil King's treasure house to replenish his consumption. He wasn't willing to wait any longer. He was determined to obtain the Freedom Talisman. At this time, Great Freedom Heavens also saw countless Emperor Source pouring into Yi Shiwen's body. Even with his strength, he didn't have so many Emperor Source. Only a genuine Emperor could have so many Emperor Source. Otherwise, who could have so many Emperor Source? Of course, the inheritances of those Emperors were an exception. However, their Emperor Source had to be distributed to countless people. Moreover, they had to keep it. They couldn't use it all in one go. Moreover, they couldn't use it all at once like Yi Shiwen did. Only Yi Shiwen would behave in such a prodigal manner. So many Emperor Source. It's really great. My strength can increase by more than a little as long as I have these Emperor Source. Freedom Sky's eyes lit up. He had already reached the peak, and his strength couldn't increase by a large margin anymore. However, he could use many methods with so many Emperor Source. Therefore, he could increase his strength in a disguised way. You want to obtain my Emperor Source? You're delusional. Yi Shiwen sneered. Both sides had designs on each other's things. Therefore, they were even more determined to kill each other. Bang! Freedom Sky's attack fiercely blasted down. However, a mass of time power erupted from Yi Shiwen's body at the same time. 7 colored streamers covered his whole body, and went up against Freedom Sky's attack. An astonishing collision broke out in an instant. The power of Freedom Sky's attack had increased by several times after using the Freedom Talisman. However, it was still easily blocked by Yi Shiwen. How is this possible? Freedom Sky's face revealed a somewhat incredulous expression. He knew very well how powerful his Freedom Talisman was. However, it didn't have any effect after using it. This made him frown. This is the Time Robe. Chapter 28:16. At this moment, he suddenly remembered. As a participant of the previous war, he was no stranger to the Time Robe. In the past, the Time King had single-handedly defeated the entire celestial race and sent them into a state of chaos. Although he wasn't one of the main forces in the battle that caused the fall of the Time King, he had also participated in the battle on the periphery. That battle had left a deep impression on him. Even now, he still couldn't forget it. That earth-shattering battle had shocked even him, who was one of the most powerful beings below the imperial monarch. After countless years, he had also improved from being one of the strongest experts below the Emperor King. He could almost be called the #1 expert in the world. However, whenever he thought of that battle, he would still tremble in fear. However, he immediately remembered that although it was the Time Robe, it was still in the hands of the Time King. It was certainly invincible in the hands of the Time King. However, in the hands of Yi Shiwen, a divine king, it was not necessarily the case. Now, he had the opportunity to seize the Time Robe. At that time, as long as he had the Time Robe, he would be able to comprehend the Great Way. Not to mention becoming the #1 expert in the world, it was not impossible for him to achieve the Emperor King's way. Greed flashed in his eyes. At his level, ordinary god artifacts would not even be able to make him open his eyes. However, the Time Robe definitely had the right to make him look sideways. In fact, he could even stare blankly at it. After obtaining the Time Robe, he would naturally be the #1 expert in the world. As an invincible expert, he actually did not have a Tao artifact in his possession. This in itself was a hidden danger. When he fought against experts on the same level as him, this could very well become a hidden danger. Not to mention the fact that Yi Shiwen had so many Emperor origins in his hands. This was something that he coveted even more. However, he couldn't figure out why Yi Shiwen had so many emperor origins in his hands. This was simply inconceivable. After all, even he didn't have so many emperor origins in his hands. The great freedom talisman on Freedom Heaven's body suddenly lit up, and the sky trembled. It seemed that under this terrifying pressure, there was no way to resist. This was true terror and power. In the depths of the world, the sound of the laws of the universe shattering rang out. Everyone was terrified, but they still didn't dare to approach. They were trembling. The number one under the heavens, even if it wasn't his true body that personally descended, he was still far more powerful than they could imagine. After a short period of absent-mindedness, everyone's attention quickly returned. The battle between Yi Shiwen and Freedom Heaven was still going on. In fact, it was still going on crazily. Yi Shiwen had the protection of the time magic robe, and the flowing lights on his body had become even more intense. In fact, they had become even more unscrupulous. More and more powerful rays of light wreaked havoc on his body. Bang! 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 Freedom Heaven was trying to widen the gap between him and Yi Shiwen so that he could pierce through Yi Shiwen with his own laws. However, Yi Shiwen was the complete opposite. His gilded tyrant body had already reached the grand accomplishment level. His vitality was the most powerful aspect of his body. His body was simply invincible. His fist could pierce through the entire universe. It was as if an emperor had come to this world. His entire body was shining, and Freedom Heaven's attacks would fall on his body. But they would be absorbed by the time magic robe. Therefore, he didn't widen the gap between him and Freedom Heaven. Instead, he launched a melee in front of him. His agility technique had reached an unimaginable level with the help of the devil wings. It seemed to everyone that Freedom Heaven was constantly retreating. He was trying to widen the gap between him and Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen didn't give him such an opportunity. Instead, he was fighting in close combat. He had displayed his martial arts to the peak. He was using his powerful vitality to resist the imprisonment of the Big Fool's Law. Yi Shiwen's imposing aura was rising with each passing second with the help of the time magic robe, which was supported by the Emperor Source. The blue dome of heaven was trembling, and endless auspicious signs were spurting out. However, these auspicious signs were unimaginably terrifying, and they pierced through the world. Freedom Heaven was supported by the Great Freedom Talisman. However, he couldn't withstand it. The Great Freedom Talisman wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen. Neither was it a match for the Time Magic Robe. After all, the Time Magic Robe was a supreme divine tool left behind by an extremely powerful emperor. Yi Shiwen wasn't a tool spirit, so he couldn't display its full power. However, it was enough to subdue the enemy. Bang! Freedom Heaven took a direct hit from Yi Shiwen, and blood spurted out of the corner of his mouth. He had suffered a huge loss in the physical confrontation with Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had used the time magic robe as a protection, and he had smashed the defense cast by the Great Freedom Talisman. Countless runes had emerged on the surface of the Freedom Talisman. Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. You'll die today if you force my real body to come here. Freedom Heaven kept retreating as he roared again and again. He had never fought such a stifling battle. It had made him feel suffocated. He wouldn't have believed that someone could force him to this extent if he hadn't come here. And this was because he lacked a Tao tool. And this was the fundamental reason why he had been suppressed today. Therefore, he had become even more obsessed with Tao tools. After all, he wouldn't be suppressed like this again if he had a Tao tool. It was unforgivable even if it was only his doppelganger that was being suppressed by someone else. Force you? A sneer flashed across the corner of Yi Shiwen's mouth. I'm not forcing you. I want to kill you. You want your real body to come here? Ha 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 ha, I want to see how you'll come here. A trace of panic flashed in Freedom Heaven's eyes. Indeed, Yi Shiwen had guessed it. It was impossible for his real body to come here so easily. Otherwise, he would have come here with his real body, instead of just a doppelganger. After all, relatively speaking, Yi Shiwen was only a little bit of a problem, and the Allied Forces headquarters was the real problem. In these past 100 years, if it could be said that they had caught the Allied forces of the various races off guard, then now, the old fellows of the various races that were hiding in the myriad heavens realm had already appeared. If he dared to leave the Allied forces of the various races and come to kill Yi Shiwen, the entire Tian clan Allied forces would die under the siege of those old fellows. This was not a joke. The celestial race could contend against the various races in the heavens, but it didn't mean that the alliance had no power to fight back. Although he was the strongest person in the world, he was not an emperor. It was impossible for him to be invincible. There were still some old fellows in the alliance that made him feel very afraid. How could he not know? This was exactly what Yi Shiwen had expected. It was impossible for his real body to come here so easily, unless he planned to sacrifice those of the same race for Yi Shiwen alone. That was simply impossible. Humph, you are so insolent. Sooner or later, you will pay the price. Freedom Heaven roared. Today, he had been pushed to an unprecedented point by Yi Shiwen. The anger in his heart kept bursting out. Pay the price? There is no such person in the world. Yi Shiwen blasted out a punch, and the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel rotated. It was contaminated with the power of time, and it burst out with a terrifying brilliance. There were even solid crystals boiling in it. That was the solid form of time, and it could injure people in an instant. Freedom Heaven roared again, and the great Freedom Talisman burst out with an unimaginable light. However, it was still defeated by Yi Shiwen's punch. Their spiritual power was simply not on the same level. Even if he could mobilize the power of heaven and earth to help, he couldn't make up for the gap. At this moment, he realized that he had miscalculated this time. Pucci! The power of 6 paths of reincarnation hit his chest, and it raged on his chest, directly blasting him away. Yi Shiwen's expression was indifferent, but he didn't show any mercy. He rushed out and grabbed the sword intention in his hand. Then, he slashed down from the sky, and was about to behead Freedom Heaven. He was burning the Emperor's source every minute and every second. Even Yi Shiwen, who was used to being extravagant, felt distressed at this rate. He could save a lot of things if he ended the battle a second earlier. Bang! The sword intention fell again, and directly blasted on Freedom Heaven's body. It instantly broke his defense, and made him scream in pain. He felt as if his body would explode on the spot. The great Freedom Talisman burst out with light and stabilized his body. So, he didn't explode on the spot. At this moment, his movements had weakened due to his injuries. He couldn't keep up with Yi Shiwen's speed even if he used a secret technique. The gap between them was getting bigger and bigger. Yi Shiwen had already arrived in front of him, and his hands were emitting endless golden light. He wanted to tear Freedom Heaven apart. His whole body was spurting blood. Yi Shiwen, I'll make you pay the price even if I die. Freedom Heaven roared, and a rare fanaticism appeared in his eyes. The power in his body instantly boiled, and he wanted to self-destruct. He was just a doppelganger. Although this would cause him to suffer a lot of losses, he was not afraid. Anyway, it was just a doppelganger. It would be best if he could kill Yi Shiwen. He had to pay a price to kill Yi Shiwen. For him, he would lose some face. However, even if he lost face, it was better than letting Yi Shiwen grow and become a thorn in his side. You want to self-destruct? You're thinking too much. Yi Shiwen roared. His entire body was flowing with 7-colored light. His entire body looked like a glazed statue. His big hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body. The terrifying power of time displayed its terrifying power. Time had unexpectedly reversed. The power of his big explosion was forced back into his body bit by bit. He suddenly spouted a mouthful of blood, and the power of the backlash instantly injured Freedom Heaven to the extreme. Chapter 28:17. He had unleashed all of his power to the extreme when he had self-detonated. But now Yi Shiwen had used the power of time to force it back little by little. One could well imagine how serious the damage would be. Only a small part of the energy that had been unleashed had erupted in his body. But it was enough to seriously injure him. Puff! Great Freedom Heavens spouted a mouthful of blood, and sprayed it all over the world. Dragon scales had appeared on his body. This was a sign that he had lost control of his body after sustaining such a serious injury. But it was useless even if he had realized this because he had been caught by Yi Shiwen. He wanted to struggle, but it was useless. Yi Shiwen's big hand was like an iron hoop that had bound him. He didn't have the strength to break free after sustaining such a serious injury. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen was getting stronger. It seemed as if he could sense the transformation every minute and every second. This was what scared him the most. Yi Shiwen sneered. He spread his big hand, and directly grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body. "You want the Great Freedom Talisman?" Great Freedom Heavens reacted immediately. He immediately understood what Yi Shiwen wanted. He couldn't help but become angry. In his opinion, this was treason. Yi Shiwen had dared to covet his Great Freedom Talisman. "Humph, so what?" Yi Shiwen sneered. His big hand directly penetrated Great Freedom Heaven's body. The Great Freedom Talisman was glowing in the depths of his body. Yi Shiwen grabbed it, and it continued to struggle. It seemed as if it wanted to escape. "It's useless," Yi Shiwen said, and sealed the Great Freedom Talisman. Bang! Yi Shiwen's big hand grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body, and his spirit exploded. His flesh and blood filled the sky on the spot, and was absorbed by Yi Shiwen's time robe. Yi Shiwen held the Great Freedom Talisman in his other hand. It was constantly emitting golden rays of light. Yi Shiwen sneered slightly. His entire mind had penetrated into the Great Freedom Talisman. It seemed as if he had entered a state of enlightenment. At the same time, outside the Alliance headquarters, in the headquarters of the army of the Heavenly Clan, Great Freedom Heaven suddenly opened his eyes. His face, which had never changed since ancient times, showed a look of anger. "How dare he! How dare he!" Freedom Heaven flew into a rage. He had already sensed the tragic death of his doppelganger. It was truly a tragic death. He was still suffering humiliation even at the moment of his death. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had seized his Freedom Talisman. This was an extraordinary humiliation. He now had an impulse to fly out to find Yi Shiwen and execute him. However, he clearly felt that as soon as his aura broke out, several auras immediately soared into the sky from the Alliance headquarters, facing him from a distance. Obviously, he had been targeted by the Alliance headquarters. Although he had held back a few of the old monsters in the Allied forces headquarters and did not dare to go out and exterminate the other Tian clan Allied forces, on the other hand, wasn't he also being held back by those old monsters? From this point of view, it was really hard to say which side suffered more. Just like now, he had suffered a great loss, but had no choice but to act himself. "No, this kid is so powerful. If I let him go, he will inevitably become a big trouble for my clan. I must get rid of him as soon as possible. Otherwise, he will become a big trouble for me sooner or later." The killing intent in his heart became more intense. He had seen Yi Shiwen's performance. In such a short time, Yi Shiwen was able to replicate his method. This was simply unheard of. Coupled with the fact that Yi Shiwen had risen in such a short time, this was already an extremely dangerous sign in his opinion. Perhaps Yi Shiwen could really achieve a very profound level in the future. "Men, summon the old ancestors here," he roared loudly. At this time, outside the battlefield, many experts of the Hidden Alliance were dumbfounded. They did not know what the mystery was, but they only saw that Yi Shiwen had easily defeated Freedom Heaven. Even if it was just a spirit incarnation, it was still an unimaginable existence for them. The reputation of the Great Freedom Heaven was too resounding. They had heard of it regardless of whether they were willing or not. This name alone was enough to make the allied forces of the various races lose their courage upon hearing it. However, such a person had been defeated by Yi Shiwen. Yes, it was a crushing defeat. It was not a narrow defeat. In fact, it meant that Yi Shiwen didn't even have the strength to fight back. At this time, even some people who had been disloyal to Yi Shiwen were gone. They had either been eliminated or hidden in the deepest part of the Hidden Alliance. They could only obey Yi Shiwen's orders as long as he was alive. It was impossible for them to turn the situation around. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen could have easily killed them with his strength. This was without a doubt. Many people were envious of Yi Shiwen. Why has such a person appeared in the Hidden Valley? Their Hidden Alliance will prosper for a long time under Yi Shiwen's leadership. In fact, it won't be impossible for them to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Emperor's inheritance someday. No one had ever achieved such a thing. However, wasn't Yi Shiwen already walking on this path? He had already fulfilled many of the necessary conditions. Perhaps he would also have the possibility of success in the future. Many people began to get a little excited as they thought of this. Normally, the inheritance of the imperial monarch was something that they could only hope for. But now, perhaps they might really be able to compare with the inheritance of the imperial monarch one day. Just this alone was sufficient to make many people submit to him. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen possessed such formidable strength. So, they had no choice but to submit to him. The battle was over at this time. However, no one dared to approach him. Firstly, the aftermath of the battle was still wreaking havoc. Secondly, it seemed that Yi Shiwen was still in the state of enlightenment. So, no one dared to disturb him at this time. They were also powerful experts. So, they naturally knew how important enlightenment was for an expert. So, they didn't dare to rashly approach and disturb him. Yi Shiwen finally opened his eyes after a long time. The great freedom talisman in his hand had turned into ashes with a bang. A look of pity flashed in his eyes. It's a pity that this great freedom talisman is a defective product. He had thoroughly absorbed this great freedom talisman. So, he naturally felt that this great freedom talisman wasn't the real great freedom talisman. In fact, it might be a defective product that the great freedom heavens had refined at the same time. Or, it might have been an experimental product. The power of this great freedom heavens talisman was also enormous. In fact, it could even support the battle between the great freedom heavens and Yi Shiwen. However, a fake was still a fake. It couldn't be compared with the real thing. However, it still contained the great freedom heavens' understanding of the Great Way. It could be said that it was an eye-opener for Yi Shiwen. It turned out that the depths of the Great Way were like this. Turned out that it could be used in this way. Yi Shiwen's stagnant understanding of the Great Way had suddenly improved by leaps and bounds. It could even be said that his understanding of the Great Freedom Talisman would be comparable to that of the Great Freedom Heaven if he could comprehend it thoroughly. His cultivation would skyrocket by then. However, his harvest was big enough. Yi Shiwen felt that he had finally touched that realm. That realm was called the Quasi-Emperor Realm. It was the last realm before the Emperor Realm. He would become one of the strongest experts in the world once he successfully crossed it. His fighting strength would also become more powerful, and it would be upgraded to another level. However, he wasn't fully prepared yet. It would be a huge destruction to the entire Hidden Valley if he were to attract the Quasi-Emperor tribulation. Yi Shiwen made up his mind. He would first go to the headquarters of the Allied forces to understand the current situation. Then, he would look for a secret place to cross the tribulation. He knew very well that it would be impossible for him not to attract the attention of the heavenly race after this battle. He didn't dare to cross the tribulation near the hidden valley. Otherwise, the aftermath of his tribulation would destroy the entire hidden valley. He wasn't an ordinary quasi-emperor. So, his tribulation would naturally be 10 times or even 100 times stronger than that of an ordinary quasi-emperor. In addition, if the heavenly race sent people to stop him, there would be another huge battle. He needed to make arrangements and preparations in advance. He had to think of all aspects. Otherwise, if he only thought about this problem when he was crossing the tribulation, he might die. He also needed to invite helpers to cross the tribulation. There were still many things he needed to do. He wasn't alone now. No one would come to find trouble with him. Of course, the most ideal situation would be to enter the martial sect or the emperor's inheritance to cross the tribulation. He could also borrow the help of their formations and heritage. Of course, the probability of that was very low. No matter how good his relationship with the martial sect was, it was impossible for him to get the opportunity to enter and cross the tribulation. The destruction of the quasi-emperor tribulation was too great. It was only possible if it was one of their own. Yi Shiwen sighed slightly. Those who didn't come from the emperor's inheritance were indeed at a disadvantage in all aspects. For example, if he wanted to cross the tribulation now, he would have to consider a lot. If he was a martial sect disciple, he wouldn't have to consider these things at all. Naturally, the old antiques of the martial sect would support him and solve his problems. In many cases, a powerful force was indeed very useful. Yi Shiwen restrained his mind, and forcibly suppressed his restless martial power. Then, he returned to the hidden valley and returned to his throne. The people of the Hidden Alliance returned one after another. They were no longer as arrogant and unruly as before. This battle had thoroughly made them understand how huge the gap between them and Yi Shiwen was. "I've made a fool of myself. Someone actually planned to make a big fuss in our alliance meeting. Fortunately, the final problem has been solved," Yi Shiwen said lightly. He didn't regard this as a big problem. However, this made everyone feel that he was exceptionally enigmatic. He could easily defeat the great freedom heavens. This was something that they couldn't guess. Chapter 28:18. Yi Shiwen didn't overestimate the importance of Great Freedom Heaven. After all, he had already defeated her. It was useless to overestimate her. However, in the eyes of others, this was a symbol of his strength. Many kings were still digesting this shocking fact. Yi Shiwen had killed the incarnation of Great Freedom Heaven. Even if it was just an incarnation, no one had ever heard of such a thing. This in itself was a miracle. Yi Shiwen's momentum of rise was so fierce that even the divine kings and divine lords who were used to seeing storms trembled. His speed was too fast. However, at the same time, his confidence in the entire secret alliance had increased by quite a lot. This wasn't an alliance that had a fraction of the ordinary 10 great divine kings. Instead, it had the battle prowess of a quasi-emperor. To an alliance, this was extremely important. Without such a guarantee, how could they compete with the world? With this interference, the alliance meeting was not interrupted. Instead, it was completed with an even more amazing result. This time, even without Great Freedom Heaven, Yi Shiwen would still find a way to deal with the troublemakers. He naturally understood the principle of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. He was waiting to see if anyone dared to come out. Now, with Great Freedom Heaven, the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys had far exceeded the original expectations. Because it was no longer killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. It was killing the monkeys to scare the chickens. During the alliance meeting, everyone's scope of responsibility was divided and the organization's hierarchy was re-established. The highest position was naturally Yi Shiwen, followed by the Deputy Alliance Master Yin King. The remaining divine kings were all elders of the secret alliance. Apart from the elders of the secret alliance, the rest were divine lords. They were considered the main force and pillars of the entire secret alliance. After all, it was impossible to let the elders and the alliance master do everything. There was already a framework for this. They just needed to wait for Yi Shiwen, the alliance master, to make the final confirmation. After solving these problems, this alliance meeting was considered to have come to an end. Basically, most of the forces of the various sects of the alliance had been taken into the alliance headquarters. It was no longer a loose alliance like before. Instead, it was a tighter alliance. The various sects of the alliance also had the authority to restrict and dispatch the forces of various sections. This was a very important change. As a result, the secret alliance had become more powerful. It could be said that its cohesion had reached a new level. Originally, many divine kings were very reluctant to hand over their power. However, after seeing Yi Shiwen wipe out the Great Freedom King in one battle, they didn't have any other thoughts. One by one, they handed over a portion of their authority. Of course, they had to hand over all of their authority. That would require time to slowly adjust, and it was impossible for them to take over all of their authority at once. Yi Shiwen didn't stop to rest after completing the entire alliance meeting. He went straight to the alliance headquarters. Compared to 100 years ago, it was completely different. 100 years ago, the Tian clan had just been released, and they invaded everywhere. It could be said that their invasion was like fire, and the 10,000 worlds were caught off guard. And now, after hundreds of years, all the major forces had completely recovered and stabilized. Although the celestial race had occupied a large portion of the universe, there were no signs of further collapse. Although the flames of war were not as intense as before, the battles between the two sides for many strategic locations were more bloody and cruel. The repeated battles of a world required countless troops to be invested. This kind of battle for position was the most bloody and competitive. It was no longer effective for a single person's surprise attack. Battles between large armies were common in the past hundreds of years. Military experts emerged endlessly from all over the world. Such a chaotic world was the battlefield for their cultivation. They could get the most abundant growth in the chaos of war. The road from the Alliance headquarters to the Hidden Valley was relatively calm in general. The Tian clan didn't harass everywhere, because they would wait for the Alliance forces to react and launch a large-scale battle. Then, the Tian clan wouldn't have so many troops scattered. Both sides were obviously planning to finish the battle in one go. Surprise attacks everywhere wouldn't help to solve the opponent's main force, and it wouldn't solve the whole problem. However, because they were afraid of the strength of the other side, neither side acted rashly. In other words, they were still gathering their strength and striving to solve the other side in one go. Yi Shiwen quickly arrived at the Alliance headquarters. At this time, the Alliance headquarters had been divided into two worlds. One side was the Alliance headquarters, and the other side was the current base camp of the Tian clan. It was built directly outside the Alliance headquarters, and it was tit for tat. Obviously, the Tian clan intended to block the Alliance headquarters. Both sides were at daggers drawn, and traces of fighting could be seen everywhere. Although the armies of both sides didn't make a move, the collisions of small-scale patrols could be seen constantly. Yi Shiwen had just arrived at the battlefield, and he clearly felt that several quasi-emperor-level divine senses swept over. Obviously, the entire battlefield was under their surveillance, so that they wouldn't be caught off guard. However, they only swept a little. At this time, Yi Shiwen was only showing the strength of a peak divine king. Although it was worth paying attention, it wasn't enough to change the balance of the battlefield. Naturally, they didn't feel anything. Yi Shiwen looked at the tents of both sides. The fortresses were like the sands of the Ganges River, endless. The war potential of both sides had been stimulated to the extreme, but because there was no Emperor-King level master in charge, they didn't have the ability to break the formation alone. The Great Freedom Heaven was so arrogant, but it was only able to retreat from the Alliance headquarters unscathed. It couldn't break the formation at all. Yi Shiwen was a high-level member of the Alliance, so he naturally had a way to enter. However, when he entered, he saw a large group of people coming out of the Alliance headquarters, and the person leading was none other than the nightmare that Yi Shiwen had defeated previously. Seeing Yi Shiwen now, it was like meeting an enemy, and its eyes were exceptionally red. "It's you?" The nightmare immediately recognized Yi Shiwen, and its eyes turned red. Yi Shiwen defeated it, broke the heaven-devouring devil jar, and snatched the word devil from it. To it, this was a great humiliation, and even the entire original demon clan suffered a great humiliation. "So it's you." Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and didn't take it to heart. Many years ago, he wasn't afraid of the nightmare, and 100 years later, he naturally had even less to worry about. "Yi Shiwen, you still dare to show up?" The nightmare's eyes suddenly bloomed with bursts of intense light. The entire army's advance stopped because of this unforeseen event. Everyone was a little puzzled. What's wrong with the nightmare? Why is he releasing such shocking hostility? Why wouldn't I dare to show up? Is the Alliance headquarters already under the control of the original demon clan? Yi Shiwen sneered. "I advise you not to ask for a snub. If you want to fight, then I can accompany you. 100 years ago, you weren't my match, and even more so now." The nightmare was immediately seething with anger, and it was burning with rage. Yi Shiwen didn't even bother to look at him. Although he looked very pitiful, but 100 years ago, if he couldn't stop him, he didn't know how he would have been dealt with. The competition in this world was so cruel. "Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. In this world, there will always be people who can deal with you. If you're too arrogant, there will be a day when you'll receive retribution." The nightmare's eyes instantly turned into demon eyes. "Retribution? Ha ha, you actually believe this?" Yi Shiwen laughed loudly. "Nightmare, you're also a veteran quasi-emperor. You know what's right and wrong in this matter. I don't want to say anything more. Right now, a great enemy is in front of us. Otherwise, do you think you can keep your life?" "Yi Shiwen, what did you say?" The nightmare's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. "Nightmare, this is the brat who defeated you? He's really arrogant." At this moment, a proud voice came from afar. In just a moment, a few figures walked over from afar and directly arrived in front of the two. Yi Shiwen looked over and saw 2 old men and an old woman. Every one of them looked extremely ugly. Among the 2 old men, one had pitch-black scales all over his body, while the other had the appearance of a human, but his face was full of wrinkles, and he was basically skin and bones. "Heavenly Monster 3 Elders." Yi Shiwen immediately stated the origins of these 3 people. To him, these 3 people weren't difficult to distinguish. They were really too famous. Among so many quasi-emperors, they were considered prominent. Originally, the 3 of them weren't like this. After all, as dignified extraordinary figures, maintaining a youthful appearance wasn't difficult at all. Even if some people didn't care about these changes to their skin and flesh, it was rare for them to become so ugly. However, these 3 people were an exception. The 3 of them could be said to be of the same breadth and branches. Basically, wherever they went, the 3 of them could be seen together. Thus, as time passed, the 3 of them began to gradually become famous. However, the thing that really made them famous was that the 3 of them had entered a secret realm together. No one knew what they had accidentally eaten, but they ended up like this. However, their cultivation had improved greatly. They had advanced from an ordinary peak divine king to a quasi-emperor level expert in one go. However, although they knew that there was such a fortuitous encounter, ordinary people rarely tried it. Because although they could enter the quasi-emperor realm, there was no possibility of advancing further. Basically, divine kings wouldn't choose this path. because, unlike mortals, the life of a god was endless. Sooner or later, they would break through, so there was no need to do such a thing. Of course, it was also because the heavenly monster three elders were tight-lipped about this matter. They wouldn't say anything to anyone who asked, so the specific situation became a kind of secret that no one knew. Moreover, although the three of them couldn't advance further, the three of them were of the same breath. This was also why many people were unwilling to provoke them. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.